Chapter 26. Hidden Front. This is the second time Karen has come to Zifa's office. It's still the same as the first time. The room is very simple, with only a filing cabinet, a water dispenser, a few chairs, a long table, and loose items. A few scattered green plants. The difference from last time was that there was a wooden box sitting quietly on the long table. Karen stood opposite Zifa excitedly and showed a questioning expression to Zifa. Zifa nodded amusedly. This is the famous sword you want. See if it fits your hand. Karen no longer hesitated, opened the wooden box, and a brand new scabbard came into view. The scabbard is black gold. Made of fine iron, with smooth curves and carved with mysterious and exquisite patterns, it shows a luxurious atmosphere. The hilt of the sword is also engraved with exquisite patterns, dotted with stars. The sword grid is not large, and is inlaid with unknown fish scale patterns. With a kang-kang sound, the sword edge was unsheathed, and the cold light flashed, revealing its sharp edge. Karen nodded with satisfaction and liked it more and more. After examining it carefully, he found that something was wrong with the sword because it was too new. This sword seems to be very new. Zifa nodded. Yes, you have good eyesight. This sword is indeed very new, but it is not a new sword. It is a famous sword that was cast 3 years ago. It's just that I haven't found a suitable owner for it. Why? Karen asked curiously. Because there are very few people in our marine who use this kind of weapon, and there are even fewer people who have the strength to choose a famous sword, so it has been retained. Zifa explained. Karen thought thoughtfully and said in a deep voice, so I am the first owner of this sword. Not bad. Zifa nodded. Does this sword have a name? Karen asked. Zifa thought for a moment and said, I remember it was called Zhang Feng, because it has never shown its edge since it was created. Karen thought deeply and said in a deep voice, okay, I understand. After putting the Zhang Feng away, Karen looked at Zifa and said with some embarrassment, Teacher Zifa, do you have money? This is the second thing Karen came here to do, borrow money from Zifa. Zifa looked at Karen in surprise and said, I remember there was nothing to consume in the military camp. That's right, I have completely mastered the return of life. Through the return of life, I can eat Poseidon food to strengthen my body. Karen said honestly. He has no intention of hiding this matter. Only by properly exposing his specialness can Marine value him more and increase his efforts in cultivating his own resources. What? Zifa stood up in surprise and looked at Karen in disbelief. As early as the morning when he stood in the military posture, he had some doubts, but he only felt that Karen could use it, rather than fully mastering it. Are you sure you have complete control? Zifa asked again. Karen did not explain, but used life return to grow his hair crazily and make various postures at the same time, which was enough to prove that he had mastered life return. Zifa closed his mouth, the scene in front of him left no room for doubt. What a freak! After a long silence, Zifa muttered. Karen put away his hair, slowly sat down opposite Zifa, and said in a deep voice, how is it? Can you borrow some money? Zifa lit a cigar and said solemnly, no, I will report your situation to the superiors and apply for you so that you can eat Poseidon for free. However, this will take a few days. The talent shown by Karen far exceeded Zifa's expectations. I originally thought that Karen's talent was very good, but now, not only is it good, I am afraid that even Sakaski can surpass it. After many years, Karen is definitely the most talented person Zifa has ever seen. Thank you. Karen got the answer she wanted and stood up to leave. Wait. I'm still so impatient. Zifa stopped Karen, pondered for a few seconds and said, how about I change you to a sharp knife? Karen was silent for a moment and said in a deep voice, I heard that famous swords will become more powerful with their masters. Zifa nodded, not bad. Karen grinned, his tone full of confidence, I like this sword. Zifa stared blankly at the high-spirited young man in front of him, his thoughts drifting into the distance unknowingly. Once upon a time, he was as courageous, confident and high-spirited as Karen. Until that night, the night when his wife and children were brutally revenged by pirates. He thought more than once, if his child had not died. If my child hadn't died, he might have done the same to Karen. Karen looked at Zifa who was suddenly silent, feeling a huge sadness from him, and couldn't help but expressed concern. Teacher Zifa? Are you okay? Go away! Zifa scolded with a smile. Zifa raised his head, his sadness swept away. After leaving Zifa's office, Karen found a sneaky man standing in the shadows, with the cigar in his mouth illuminating Smoker's gloomy cheeks. Seeing Karen coming out, Smoker quickly walked to Karen, first looked at the sword box that Karen was carrying, and then said in a deep voice, "Let's go." Karen nodded helplessly, knowing that Smoker had been waiting to treat him to dinner. So the two of them walked to the cafeteria together. There were a lot of people in the cafeteria at this time, and every dining window was full of people, except for the special windows. After all, there were still very few taken advantage of in this world. There were only a few people at the special window. Karen looked at Smoker, pointed at the special window and asked, "Have you ever eaten at this window?" "Have eaten?" To Karen's expectation, Smoker nodded. "What do you think? Compared with the free ones?" Karen asked curiously. He wanted to know whether people who have not mastered the return of life will strengthen their bodies after eating Poseidon. "It's not that great. It tastes just like an ordinary window." Smoker frowned slightly and guessed, it should be a window for people who don't want to queue. "It seems that eating Poseidon will not improve your health. Also, if everyone can be like Karen, the special window will never be so deserted. But eating Poseidon can definitely improve your physical condition. As the saying goes, a person is nourished by the soil and water. In this world of monsters per capita, it is definitely related to the food they usually eat." With Smoker as his enemy, Karen was naturally not polite and ordered several meals in a row before stopping and leaving with satisfaction. Karen was holding more than a dozen meals, looked at Smoker with empty hands and asked, "Aren't you going to eat? Didn't you order already?" Smoker was startled and asked in surprise. Then he seemed to realize something and his face darkened. "You mean, you ordered more than a dozen dishes and you ate them yourself?" Karen looked at her nose with her eyes, her mouth with her nose, and her heart with her mouth, without any objection. "Have you finished eating?" Smoker couldn't bear it any more and asked angrily. Karen nodded sheepishly, "Well, as I said, I eat a lot, and these may not be enough for me." Smoker then remembered that Karen had indeed said that he had a lot of food. At that time, he thought it was a modest statement. He twitched his mouth slightly, stood up helplessly, and went to the window to order some more food. When he came back, Karen was eating quickly, so fast that Smoker rubbed his eyes in disbelief. Hiccup. Karen rubbed her belly and burped, took out a tissue and wiped her mouth. The graceful movement made Smoker wonder if it was Karen who was eating just now. "Thank you for the hospitality. Then, I'll leave first, and you can eat slowly." Karen stood up, straightened her clothes, and straightened her back. With that said, he left without caring about Smoker's reaction. Smoker is left alone in the messy cafeteria. Chapter 27. Iron Block. Harmful Evil. Early morning, training ground. Today's campus is no different from the past, except that it can be seen from the faces of the recruits that they are particularly excited. Because today is the day when Zifa teaches them the 6 marine styles, they still clearly remember that on the first day they arrived, an instructor named Dominic demonstrated the power of the marine 6 styles to them. Each of them had a fiery look on their face and stared at Zifa with burning eyes. Zifa looked at the people with fiery eyes, cleared his throat, and said in a deep voice, "I believe many of you know the content of today's training. The physical training in the past few days was just an appetizer. Today is the skill you need to master most to join the elite training camp. That's the technique Dominic used on you on the first day you came here. A physical technique that can only be mastered by exceeding the limits of the human body marine 6 styles." With that said, Zifa pointed to Dominic, who was standing aside solemnly. "I believe you have also seen the power of the marine 6th style. There are 6 skills in total. They are iron block, shaver, paper painting, moonwalk, land kick and finger gun. Today we will start with the simplest method of shaving. After you learn how to shave, if you want to learn the other 6 techniques, you can feel free to ask me." Zifa paused for a moment to let everyone absorb the news. After a while, seeing that no one raised any doubts, he continued. "Of course, that will happen later. Today I mainly practice shaving. Shaving is a fast-moving skill, and the practice method is very simple. It is to kick the ground dozens of times or more to generate strong rebound force to move at high speed." As he said that, Zifa's body suddenly flashed and he appeared in front of recruit who was standing in front. See? This is shaving. Zifa demonstrated the shaving technique once, and then let the recruit practice freely, touching and observing. Karen recalled Zifa's force-generating skills, used life return to shift his attention to his legs, and stepped on the ground quickly. In just an instant, Karen's figure suddenly disappeared on the spot, and arrived in front of Zifa in the blink of an eye. It worked. Just practiced it once. Karen was ecstatic inside. Zifa was startled by the sudden appearance of Karen, and in response, he violently waved his fist forward. Boom! The next moment, Karen climbed up from the ground in a daze, eyes flashing with stars, and walked unsteadily. Only then did Zifa realize what he had done. He came to Karen and said with a smile, "Ha ha ha, it's you. Why did you suddenly appear in front of me?" Karen stabilized his body and cursed in his heart. This old bastard definitely did it on purpose. Karen looked sullenly and asked, "Is it appropriate for you, an old comrade, to sneak attack on me, a young man who is less than 20 years old?" Zifa laughed and said, "What do you mean by sneak attack? It was obviously you who suddenly appeared in front of me and startled me. Do you know that I have a heart disease? It was just self-defense." Karen wanted to say something more, but was interrupted by Zifa. "Wait, did you use shaving just now?" "Yes." Karen had no reaction, and the joy of learning to shave was gone. Zifa laughed and said happily, "Not bad, not bad. You learned how to shave so quickly. You are really a genius. But you're still not very skilled at shaving. Why did you suddenly appear in front of me?" Karen thought for a while. In fact, he didn't understand how he appeared next to Zifa just now, because just now his attention was entirely on his legs and he didn't choose where to land at all. So Karen explained to Zifa how to use shaving. Zifa nodded and said in a deep voice, "Well, although you can use the shave, you can't adapt to the battle now. You can practice it a few more times and come to me to learn the other 6 postures after you can move freely." Then, regardless of Karen's reaction, he quickly turned around and left. Karen's head is full of black lines. This old bastard ran so fast, forget it, it was just me who was not careful. Next, when Karen practiced shaving, she stopped focusing entirely on her legs and started practicing with her eyes. In just one morning, he was able to use it skillfully to shave where he wanted to go. Is this genius? We obviously entered the elite training camp together, why is he so good? Those who come to the elite training camp are all geniuses. Of course, they will not admit that they are not as good as Karen, so they train harder one by one. Looking at the people who were still stamping their feet, Karen felt extremely satisfied. I'm really a genius. Karen thought narcissistically. Of course he knew in his heart that the reason why he was able to use shave skillfully was entirely because of the return of life. What? 3 days to completely master the return of life? Can you use shave with just one look? A phone bug wearing a pair of frog glasses and an afro shouted with disbelief. Zifa moved the phone bug a little further, and his tone was full of pride. Ha ha ha, yes, I saw it with my own eyes. Warring States took a sip of water, suppressed the excitement in his heart, and said in a deep voice, "Okay, I understand, just do whatever you want, Marine will give him the greatest support." Zifa nodded with satisfaction and hung up the phone bug in his hand. He exhaled a puff of snow-white smoke from his mouth happily and murmured. "Another monster appears. It's great. Dong dong dong." There was a rapid knock on the door. Zifa sat up slightly and said in a deep voice, "Come in." After rubbing his still sore eyes, Karen looked at Zifa resentfully and sat down in front of Zifa in a familiar manner. Zifa took out a box of cigars and handed it to Karen, smiling awkwardly, "Haha, let's smoke." Karen did not refuse, took out a cigar, lit it, and took a deep puff. Holding back the discomfort in his throat, he coughed lightly, and white smoke came out of his mouth. Zifa looked at Karen like this and said with a smile, "The cigar cannot reach the throat. Just inhale the smoke, linger in your mouth for a while, taste the flavor, and spit it out." Karen nodded. He had only smoked cigarettes in his previous life, not cigars. He followed Zifa's example and took a puff, tasted it in his mouth and spit it out. As expected, he felt much better. "Are you able to master shaving?" Zifa asked. "Well, that's enough, so I come here to learn the other 6 postures from you." Karen nodded and sat up straight. Zifa squinted his eyes, exhaled a puff of smoke, and praised. Yes, he is indeed a genius. Then he put out the cigar in his hand and handed Karen a pamphlet. These are the training techniques for all 6 postures. You can use them for training. Karen reached out and took the pamphlet, opened it and read it. My suggestion is to practice the iron block first. The iron block not only has a very powerful defense, but will also be of great help to you in learning domineering in the future. Okay, I understand. Karen smiled and nodded. Also, it's also about iron. Zifa suddenly said. What? Karen looked at Zifa curiously. Zifa smiled and said, the defense of the iron block is indeed powerful, but you must remember to hide if you can, and never stand there stupidly and get beaten. Karen asked amusedly, are there many people like this in Marine? Zifa seemed to have thought of something, and the corner of his mouth twitched slightly. There are indeed many, they always have inexplicable confidence in iron. Chapter 28. God avoids. In September 1503 of the Highwan calendar, Marin burned more. It has been 3 months since Karen got the Marine 6th form. During these 3 months, he focused most of his energy on learning the Marine 6th form. Facts have proved that the life return is indeed very helpful to him. When other recruits have just finished learning how to shave, Karen has already learned all the 6 Marine poses. He even had time to focus on swordsmanship. It was called swordsmanship, but in fact it was just slashing and stabbing day after day. He believed that even if he didn't learn anything and just slashed and stabbed, it would still be effective as long as he persisted for a long time. Of course, it's also because he spends most of his time on strengthening his body, so he doesn't have time to learn swordsmanship. He just simply draws his sword, chops, and stabs. Dao Ji Jian, even if the skill is insufficient, as long as the speed of slashing and stabbing is fast enough, it is still powerful. In 3 months, his physique has reached an astonishing improvement. Even without the one-sword immortal Neil, he can now easily defeat Smoker. But since he has been in the elite training camp, his reputation has not increased much. With a thought in his mind, Karen opened the system interface in his mind. Target reputation, 7136/10,000. Budding Marine talent. Skills acquired. Unrivaled skill. The first effect is to forcibly upgrade a skill you have mastered to the highest level. You have chosen to return your life. The second effect is that the more confident you shout out the move, the stronger the effect. 100% chance of being caught with bare hands. Use sword weapons with both hands. Look at a person, shout look at the sword, and 100% chance of being caught by the opponent. Well, there are still more than 2,000 left to draw the lottery. Karen rubbed his temples. There was nothing he could do about it. There had to be a choice. Since he chose to come to the elite training camp, he had to be prepared that he would not be able to gain reputation quickly in a short period of time. Possible. Zifa's office. Ding ding ding. A series of rapid ringtones came from the phone bug. Zifa picked up the phone bug at random and put it to his ear. Moxie, this is Zifa. What? Found it? Great. Zifa hung up the phone and revealed an irrepressible smile. Elite Training School. Zifa walked upright in front of the soldiers and nodded with satisfaction. You have been learning Marine 6 styles for 3 months. The slowest learner has already mastered shaving, and the stronger ones have even learned 4 physical skills. Zifa smiled, obviously in a good mood today. He paused for a moment and then said. Now, those who have mastered the 4 physical skills will be ranked first. Soon, more than 10 people came to Zifa, including Karen, Smoker, Rosinandi, and Tina. Very good. I believe you are all geniuses for being able to learn 4 types of 6 moves in just 3 months. Next, you will each find an opponent and fight in front of me. Let me see your true strength. Well, Karen, you're going to fight Dominic, and you're not allowed to use devil fruits. As he said that, Zifa looked at Dominic, who was watching the show, and said in a deep voice. Give it your all. Yes. Naturally, Dominic would not look down upon Karen. He had watched Karen train and naturally knew that Karen had no rival in recruiting. He would never look down upon the seemingly harmless opponent in front of him. Karen, please. Dominic stretched out his hand to signal Karen to attack first, and looked at Karen's actions with a serious face. Karen nodded. He had played against many recruits in the past 3 months. In the first month, each had a victory or defeat, but later it was Karen's unilateral crushing. He has always wanted to find a chance to fight instructor, but he has never had the chance, and this time. Karen's eyes were filled with fire. He pulled out the hidden blade behind him and said in a deep voice, "Then I won't be polite. Instructor, be careful." As soon as he finished speaking, Karen swung his hidden blade fiercely, and a sharp sword energy rushed towards Dominic. He had already applied Lan Jiao's force-generating skills to swordsmanship. But as soon as the sword energy landed on Dominic, Dominic ducked away, his eyes flashed, and he appeared behind Karen. Finger gun, random fight. Dominic made his hands like spears, and the overwhelming attacks continued like a torrential rain. Karen's eyes narrowed slightly, and he was determined to test his physical strength, so he didn't hide and shouted, "Iron block and golden bell." Zifa's face darkened as he stood watching the battle. It seemed that this guy didn't take his words to heart at all. Dominic felt as if his fingers had hit steel, and there was a hint of disbelief in his eyes. This guy's physical fitness is so strong, he's really a monster. Seeing that the finger gun could not break through Karen's defense, Dominic dodged back and said in a deep voice, "You are indeed a monster, but you have to be careful next time." Although 3 months is a short period of time, Karen has changed drastically from what she was 3 months ago. So what about Dominic? Of course he will grow as well. A black aura gradually enveloped Dominic's fists, Karen's pupils shrank, it was armed domineering. Seeing this scene, Zifa couldn't help laughing, "Haha, I didn't expect this boy Dominic to learn domineering, not bad." Dominic looked at Karen solemnly. The moment their eyes collided, they both saw a strong fighting spirit in each other's eyes. Bang! Dominic's figure suddenly disappeared and reappeared in front of Karen's eyes. A powerful and heavy blow landed hard on Karen's lower abdomen. Karen didn't expect Dominic to be so decisive. He didn't have time to block and took a hard blow. He retreated continuously and a stream of scarlet blood slowly spilled out from the corner of his mouth. Without giving Karen time to react, slashes kicked out by both feet struck Karen like a storm. Lan Jiao storm. As expected of the elite of the previous class, Karen, who had taken a hard blow, admired in his heart. Karen moved and flickered during the slashing attack, her body moved forward instead of retreating, and kept approaching. What a madman! Dominic sighed, with admiration in his eyes. Karen moved faster and faster, so fast that even Dominic didn't notice how Karen appeared in front of him. A sword shadow suddenly magnified in front of Dominic's eyes, and at the same time Karen's shout came. God avoids! Dominic didn't have time to dodge, so he quickly raised his arms and used his armed domineering force and the iron block to block this powerful and heavy blow. Boom! As soon as his arms came into contact with Zhang Feng, Dominic felt as if his arms were hit by a truck. His body tilted, and just when he thought he couldn't hold on, he suddenly felt that the force exerted on him became smaller. When he looked up, he realized that the sword Karen was wielding towards him was horizontal. If it's the sword's edge. Dominic shuddered, exerted force, forced Karen back, and smiled bitterly, I lost. Chapter 29. Have you ever hugged him? If instructor holds the weapon, I may not win. Karen put the Zhangfeng back into its scabbard and said modestly. Oh, you are wrong. If I had used weapons, I would have lost faster. Don't worry about me. If you lose, you will lose. I can afford to lose. Dominic stood up straight with a sigh on his face. The first time he lost to Karen was because of the Devil Fruit's ability. Now in just 3 months, he was no longer a match for Karen based on his physical strength alone. However, he can accept it because he has seen too many geniuses. Good boy, not bad. Zifa walked to the two of them with a smile and patted Dominic and Karen on the shoulders. Teacher. They both spoke at the same time, respectfully. Zifa nodded with satisfaction, looked at the elite students who had their own victories and defeats, walked to the center of the field, and said in a deep voice. Okay, I saw your performance just now, it was all very good, but a drill is just a drill after all. It's like a paper tiger that hasn't been tempered by blood. It will break if you rub it. So I decided to take a few of you for a practical training. He paused for a moment to watch the students' reactions. Hearing Zifa say that he would take them for practical training, the dozen or so students who had learned 4 of the 6 marine moves couldn't help showing expressions of joy on their faces. You know, it is very boring in the elite training camp. They have no entertainment except training day after day. Now that they hear that they can train in actual combat, it means that they can leave Marinfendo and go swimming in the sea. The faces of those who had not learned how to do it all had a lonely look on their faces, and all of them secretly made up their minds to train well. Are we leaving Marinfendo? Smoker asked first. Yes, this time I will personally lead the team and lead you to the Sabayati Islands. Zifa nodded and said with a smile. Sabayati Islands? Karen's mind moved. The Sabayati Islands are the only way to the New World, so there are many pirates, businessmen, and bounty hunters gathered here. For the vast majority of people, there are only two ways to enter the New World. One is to apply to the world government and pass through the Red Earth continent. One is to wrap the boat with alkaline mangrove resin, dive 10,000 meters, pass through a huge hole under the Red Earth continent, and reach the New World through the undersea route Fishman Island. I don't know which unlucky pirate group was targeted by Zifa. I just got news that a group called the Blade Pirates will be plated from Sabayati to the New World through Fishman Island. When Zifa said this, he glanced at Karen intentionally or unintentionally. When Karen heard that it was the Blade Pirates, she clenched her hands unconsciously, and there was a faint murderous intent in her eyes. The long training did not make him forget this demonic pirate group, the pirate group that taught Karen his first lesson when he first came to this world. He still clearly remembers the flames soaring into the sky, like a bright night, and the wailing and crying in his ears are still vivid in his mind. Looking at Zifa, who was still talking about the mission, Karen's heart felt warm. The Blade Pirates originated from the East Blue Sea and are a notorious pirate group. There are corpses everywhere they go. Every town they pass by is basically slaughtered. Zifa first talked about some of the evil deeds done by the Blade Pirates, and then continued. The leader of the Blade Pirates is named Beard. He is a swordsman with a bounty of 79 million. There is also a first mate named Scott who has a bounty of 67 million. Karen was startled. He remembered the reward for the Blade Pirates very clearly. He remembered that it shouldn't be that high. Then he understood and clenched his fists. Okay, a dozen of you come with me and set off now. Zifa was also in high spirits and didn't want to wait any longer. After boarding the warship, Karen controlled her inner excitement, walked up to Zifa, and thank you, teacher. Zifa naturally knew why Karen thanked him. He exhaled a puff of smoke, patted Karen on the shoulder, and said in a deep voice. Hate is a good thing, it will make people progress, but sometimes hatred can also make people lose their minds. You are already very strong now. I believe you will not let me down. Karen nodded solemnly, I will not let you down. Teacher. Suddenly, a sassy female voice with surprise interrupted the conversation between the two. Karen looked forward curiously and saw a beautiful woman wearing a cloak of justice, a Japanese-style hairstyle, a peach-colored short skirt, and a spider tattoo on her left leg walking over quickly. The person who came here has a good figure, with a curvy front and a curvy back, and is slim and graceful. Just one glance caught Karen's eyes. So big, no. So white, it should be very soft. Controlling the evil thoughts in his heart, Karen quickly cast his gaze to the distant sea, filled with endless reveries in his mind. It is said that pirates have many Lolita, and Marine has many royal sisters. This sentence is absolutely true. First it was Tina and now there is Jun. They are the biggest obstacles on their way to becoming stronger, and they cannot let themselves fall into this kind of gentle land. Alas, which one should I choose? So troubled. No, what am I thinking? Getting stronger is my goal, but... Karen stole a glance at Jun again, but she didn't expect that Jun was also looking at her, and their eyes met. Karen hurriedly shifted her gaze and smiled awkwardly at Jun. Seeing the person coming, Zifa put out the cigar in his hand and said with a smile, It's you, Jun, is this the warship you are leading? Yes, teacher, why are you here in person? Jun asked in confusion. I am going to take this year's elite students for a practical training. The target pirates are near the Sabayati Islands. Because time is tight, I asked you who are patrolling in Sabayati. Zifa explained. Jun looked at Karen standing behind Zifa curiously and asked, They are this year's elite, they look good. Ha ha ha, that's right, let me tell you, his potential is very scary, he might become the next Sakazuki. Zifa seemed particularly excited when he mentioned his students. Jun was shocked. He didn't expect Zifa to have such a high opinion of Karen, so he couldn't help but look at Karen a few more times. The young man in front of me is about 2.5 meters tall, not very tall, with handsome features, bright eyes and short blonde hair that makes him look very energetic. Aware of his own gaze, he gave himself a shy smile. Jun suddenly felt that the boy in front of him looked familiar. Suddenly, Zifa seemed to have thought of something and said in a confused manner. Ha ha ha, I remembered, you hugged him. Chapter 30. Kids, gather. Zifa's abrupt words caused a deathly silence in the entire audience. Karen looked confused and didn't understand why Zifa said this. He had no impression of Jun at all. Jun was also confused. Although she was not young, she didn't remember having a junior like Karen. So the two looked at Zifa in confusion. Looking at the two people who looked confused, Zifa patted his head and smiled. Ha ha ha, I forgot. You were in a coma at the time. As for Jun, you should have an impression. It was at the recruiting training school. Coma? Recruit training camp? He fainted twice in the school field, once during the assessment and once during the battle with Zifa. When he thought about it, he did think of it. When he was fighting Zifa, he remembered that he was indeed hugged by a soft body. However, at that time, he thought it was Tina, but he did not expect it to be Jun. If I remember correctly, he seemed to have pinched. Thinking of this, Karen looked towards Jun with a guilty conscience. She saw that Jun's face was red, and he couldn't tell whether it was anger or shyness. He was looking at Karen with a hint of coldness in his eyes. I just don't know why. I hugged him obviously, why? Zifa muttered as he fell into memories. Teacher. Karen and Jun spoke at the same time, stopping Zifa who was about to recall. Why, have you remembered? Zifa said with a smile. I remembered. Jun glared at Karen and gritted his teeth. A drop of sweat the size of a soybean slipped from Karen's cheek, and he stammered. Yes, really? I have no impression of this matter at all, haha. Jun looked at Karen in a funny way, not understanding why this guy definitely remembered what happened that day. Zifa looked at Karen who was sweating constantly and couldn't help but asked with concern, You brat, what's wrong with you? Karen wiped the sweat from his face and said nonsense, I'm seasick. Zifa looked at the warship that had not moved yet, and then at Jun, and said with some confusion, but the ship hasn't moved yet. Maybe it's psychological. I felt nauseated as soon as I got on the boat. Karen didn't know what she was talking about. Really? It seems that you need to strengthen your training on ships in the future. What does it mean to be seasick as a marine? Zifa seemed to accept Karen's reason and shouted angrily. Then he smiled awkwardly at Jun on the side, haha, little Jun, I made you laugh. I didn't expect this kid to be so disappointing. I'll train him well when I get back. Jun regained his previous composure and said thoughtfully, you should really train him well. Well, teacher, I'm leaving now. I won't disturb you and reminisce with Jun senpai. Karen didn't dare to stay any longer, he just wanted to leave here quickly. Senior. Jun frowned and muttered to himself, and his eyes turned cold when he looked at Karen. Karen only felt that an iceberg was staring at him, and shuddered unconsciously. Why don't you go for a walk? I have some seasickness medicine that I brought with me. You can take it and rest for a while. Zifa took out a box of seasickness medicine from his pocket and handed it to Karen. He pointed to the stool aside and motioned for Karen to sit down. This. Karen took the seasickness medicine and looked at Jun at a loss. Jun's face was cold and unmoved. Karen had no choice but to take out a pill, put it in his mouth, and sit on a stool nearby. Seeing Karen sit down, Zifa continued to Jun, actually, the reason why I chose your warship is for you and him. For me and him. Jun widened his eyes and asked in confusion. Yes, I know that you are one of the few masters with swords in marine, and he happens to be a swordsman, so I would like to ask you to teach him some time. Zifa pointed to the long sword on Karen's back and explained, you know, although my physical skills are okay, I am not as professional as you in swordsmanship. Really? So this is what happened. Jun turned to look at Karen and smiled at him, okay, I understand. I will definitely guide Junior Karen well. Zifa nodded with satisfaction and said solemnly to Karen, what are you doing standing still? Why don't you thank Jun? Karen showed a smile that was uglier than crying, I thank you, Jinmi, senpai. Not long after, the warship began to move slowly and officially set sail. The boundless sea connects with the sky, and under the reflection of the setting sun, it adds a touch of romance out of thin air. After Jun left, Zifa was surprised to find that Karen, who was originally seasick, stopped sweating and had no headache. Have you recovered? Zifa asked. Karen replied with a huh sound. How do you feel about going to sea this time? Zifa asked. I'm looking forward to it. Karen said. Seeing that Karen had no interest in talking, Zifa shook his head, turned and left. Karen stared at the sea and murmured. It was the same weather the day I left. Under calm conditions, a trace of murderous intent flashed in Karen's eyes. The soaring fire illuminated the sky, turning the night into blood red. The billowing black smoke chokes the survivors like a shinigami. The sound of gunfire and cries were intertwined, breaking the originally peaceful night. The air was filled with putrid, fishy, and burnt odors from burning charcoal, along with gunpowder smoke that has not dissipated yet. Boom boom boom. Buildings collapsed one after another, making loud noises, and the remains of the buildings were everywhere. There were corpses everywhere, and there were corpses entangled everywhere, stacked like hills. On the street, a thin pirate, holding a knife in one hand and a woman's head in the other, was strolling in the light of the fire. Under the light of the fire, his face looked hideous and hideous. Throwing the head aside casually, he chuckled. Why don't you cooperate? I said I don't like force. You are so cruel. She is obviously a pretty woman, but I haven't even enjoyed it yet. It's such a waste to be killed by you like this. A tall, fat man on the street stuck his head out and said with a smile. Snort. Scott snorted coldly, raised the long knife in his hand and slashed with it, and the voice of the man who was wailing on the side suddenly stopped. Oh, you guys really don't know how to enjoy. The next stop is Sabayati. After Sabayati, you will go to New World. I heard that there are many different races in New World. I am looking forward to it. Beard clicked his tongue, looking yearning. I heard that there are many strong people in the New World. Scott licked his dry lips and said in a deep voice. Haha, when we entered the Grand Line, didn't we also think that there were many powerful people in the Grand Line? Beard glanced at Scott and continued. It's just Whitebeard. When the Great Beard enters the New World, I will let them know what cruelty is. Scott was thoughtful after listening, and then showed a cruel smile. Jajaja. Not bad, why don't we loot it when we pass by Sabayati's land? The quality here is really too bad. Beard nodded and was about to say something when a sound of rapid footsteps came and shouted to Beard. Boss, it's not good. Marine is here, and he's going very fast. We can't run away. Beard took out the flintlock gun in his hand and shot the subordinate who came to report the news to the head. He blew the smoke from the muzzle and said disdainfully, Noisy, it's not like Marine has never been killed before. At the same time, he took out a flare from his arms, lit it, and shouted excitedly. Boys, gather together. Chapter 31. Anger. Black smoke filled the air, like a huge dark cloud, covering the entire island. The billowing black smoke seemed like the island was gasping in pain, or like it was roaring in anger. Karen stood on the bow of the warship, clenching his fists and boundless anger flashing in his eyes. He had dreamed of this familiar scene countless times in his dreams, but he never expected that it would be the same scene when he saw them again. The atmosphere on the warship became solemn, as if there was invisible pressure weighing heavily on everyone's heart. The surrounding air was solidified, and only the sound of waves crashing against the warship was quiet. Zifa couldn't suppress his anger and shouted angrily, Speed up, everyone is ready to fight. Yes. Kalangong got off the warship, and wherever he looked, there were scenes of cruel and bloody slaughter. The ground was dyed dark red with blood, and corpses were lying in a mess, some with broken limbs, and some beyond recognition. The air was filled with a strong smell of death, which made people sick. These beasts! Zifa clenched his fists with his veins exposed, let's go. Don't leave any pirates you encounter. After hearing Zifa's order, Karen could no longer control herself, drew out her hidden blade, and rushed out. Smoker, Rosinandi, not to be outdone, drew their weapons and rushed towards the center of the island. Tina walked to Zifa and asked in a low voice, Teacher, Karen. After all, a girl's heart is more delicate than a boy's. As early as after boarding the warship, She felt that something was wrong with Karen's state. She couldn't tell whether it was excitement or anger. She always felt that Karen's heart was a lot depressed. It's okay, I believe him. Zifa sighed slightly. Hatred. His eyes were filled with pain and hatred as he recalled his family, their smiles and warm embraces now a distant past. Not killing the general is so ridiculous. If he was given a chance to come back. Zifa's eyes became firm and cold, and he must make all pirates pay the price for their actions. Hey he he he. Little ones, gather together and take away all the treasures and beauties you have robbed. A pirate who was 3 meters tall and fat, and holding a western sword laughed wildly. Oh ho ho ho, boss, let's teach these annoying marines a lesson. That's right, think of it as a celebration of our entering the new world. Ha ha ha, of course. Lao Zi is a big pirate with a reward of 79 million. If you kill these damn marines, the reward should be 100 million. Beard narrowed his eyes slightly and showed a cruel smile. The next moment. Bang! Scarlet blood dripped into the mouth of Beard, who was laughing wildly. He turned around and saw a subordinate standing next to him, his body cut into 2 halves. Beard's smile froze at the corner of his mouth, and he licked the blood from the corner of his mouth, showing a look of enjoyment. Ha ha ha, Beard, you are really embarrassed. Scott, who was standing aside, laughed. Beard wiped the blood from his face and looked towards the direction where the sword energy came from. I saw a young marine holding a long sword and a gloomy face slowly walking out of the smoke. Is it marine? I didn't expect it to arrive so soon, but I'm just alone. Are you in a hurry to die? Beard shook his head, looked at Marine walking slowly towards him playfully, and suddenly exclaimed. It's amazing, someone at such a young age can actually wield sword energy. Immediately, he didn't know what he thought of, and laughed loudly. Hey he he. I admire you very much. Why don't you leave Marine and follow me? Being a pirate is much more interesting than being a Marine. Ha ha ha, that's right, kid. Being a pirate is much more fun than being a Marine. Being a pirate means you can do whatever you want. As he spoke, Scott took out a handful of treasures from the bag next to him and laughed. Karen said nothing, and what he answered was a sharp sword energy. Court death. Scott's eyes flashed with solemnity, and he also waved a sword energy, and 2 sword energy exploded in the air. Bang! Do you know the town of Sriri? This was Karen's first sentence. His tone was calm, but there was a look of pain that was difficult to suppress on his face. What? Scott picked his ears. It was a peaceful and beautiful place, with blue skies and the fragrance of flowers in the air. People were kind to each other, their smiles were warm, and life was simple and happy. Karen was lost in memories and slowly recounted. Suddenly, she suddenly raised her head, clutched the zhangfeng in her hand, and shouted angrily. However, when you arrived, everything changed and became what it is now. The sky was no longer blue, but blood red, and there were wailing and crying everywhere. Ha ha ha, it turns out they are seeking revenge. Scott laughed, what a garbage town, it's just a lousy supply depot. Really? Boundless murderous intent appeared in Karen's eyes, and he walked faster and faster. Slowly, his figure was like a sharp arrow shot from a strong bow, rushing towards Scott. Bang! 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 The pirate standing behind Scott pulled the trigger one after another, and bullets shot towards Karen like raindrops. Karen dodged sideways, waving the long sword in his hand at the same time, and the overwhelming sword energy swept towards the pirates like a strong wind. Crescent moon clashes. As the sword shadow flickered, Karen's figure suddenly disappeared from the place like a ghost. The pirates widened their eyes in horror, trying to find his trace. How is it possible? At this speed? Scott put away his smile and looked at the scene in front of him in disbelief. A sense of fear suddenly emerged in his heart. He didn't expect Karen to be so fast. Pfft! The sound of a sharp blade inserting into flesh sounded behind him, and Scott turned around sharply. I saw Karen standing behind him with a smile, and at the same time, a long sword appeared on the chest of his man. Scarlet blood gurgled out like spring water, and cold sweat slipped uncontrollably from Scott's forehead. He asked himself in his mind that if the blow just hit him, he would not be able to dodge it. Karen left a solemn smile towards Scott, and the next moment, the figure disappeared into the darkness. He wanted Scott to die in fear. Karen's figure flickers in the battle, and his swordsmanship is as beautiful as art, but full of fatal threats. Every attack he made was like dancing, elegant and cold, making it impossible for the pirates to resist. Every time he swung his sword, it was accompanied by exclamations and screams from the pirates. The surviving pirates looked at this scene in horror, and huge fear spread in everyone's hearts. This marine's strength is really too strong. Not on the same level at all. Damn you kid, how can you be so strong? Run away quickly. As soon as the sound of escaping started, it spread like a plague among the Blade pirates. Bang! Beard shouted out and shot the escaping pirate in the head. His face was not very good, and he said sadly. Escape? Whoever dares to run, I will let him take the first step. Lao Zi is a big pirate with a bounty of up to 79 million yuan. He is just a marine kid. I still don't take him seriously. What should I do? Captain? Scott asked anxiously with cold sweat streaming down his face. Hey, hee, don't forget, Lao Zi is a devil fruit user. Chapter 32. Bullfrog fruit. Mentioning this, Beard's face reappeared with a smile. It was not like he had never seen an opponent stronger than himself before. But no surprise, he still won, all because he is a devil fruit user. The devil's methods are not something that a mere swordsman can resist. Yes, the captain is a devil fruit user. Yes, as long as the captain uses devil fruit, we will not be defeated. Thinking of this, they all looked at Beard expectantly, with admiration in their eyes. Beard did not disappoint them either. He suddenly lay on the ground, his legs gradually became swollen, his body turned green, his eyes stared out, and a long tongue protruded from his mouth. Zoology, frog fruit, bullfrog morphology. This is his devil fruit, but it is too ugly after the transformation, so he rarely uses it. After transforming into bullfrog form, his explosive vision and hearing were greatly enhanced. Beard put the western sword in his hand on his tongue and stared at the surrounding environment with vigilant eyes. When Karen harvested his men again, his eyes flashed. Humph, I saw it. Bang! In an instant, Beard's thick hind limbs exerted force, his tongue rolled around the western sword, and he struck hard at Karen. The sword is like a gust of wind, with majestic momentum. The sword body draws a sharp arc in the air, carrying a sharp sword energy. His speed was so fast that Karen didn't even react. Boom! Karen couldn't dodge and took the blow hard, and his body flew upside down like a kite with its string broken. With a rumble, the building in the distance collapsed, throwing up bursts of smoke and dust. You are worthy of being Boss Beard. I'm just telling you, he's just a marine brat, I'm not panicking at all. Boss Beard is invincible. That brat should be dead. Beard narrowed his eyes in enjoyment and mocked, of course, no one can survive my blow. Karen. Smoker and Rocinante finally arrived, and as soon as they came over, they saw this scene in front of them. Damn it, this guy is a devil fruit user. Isn't even Karen a match for him? Smoker and Rocinante were shocked. They were no match for Karen in the military academy. They didn't expect that Karen would be defeated by this ugly thing in front of them. Huh? 2 more little brats are coming. Beard noticed that 2 more marine brats were coming, and said with a ferocious smile, Hey, don't panic, I will send you to see him in hell right away. Using the same move again, Beard used his legs fiercely, curled the western sword in his tongue, and shot towards Smoker and Rocinante. The sharp sword tip kept dilating Rocinante's pupils. Beard's speed was so fast, and he was worried about Karen, so he forgot to dodge for a while. In the flash of lightning, he felt his body tremble violently, and the sharp sword edge slashed across his arm, leaving a clear trail of blood. Are you looking for death? Get moving! Smoker's voice came from the side, and the gloomy voice made Rocinante tremble. Karen, he. Smoker frowned. Beard's speed was very fast, but it wasn't like he couldn't dodge. He didn't understand why Karen was hit by such an attack. Just as he was about to say something, his attention was attracted by movement in the distance. Cough, don't worry about me, I'm fine. Karen's voice came from the ruins. Thinking back to the moment that just happened, he was thinking about how to get revenge on Scott. He didn't expect that Beard next to him was actually a devil fruit user. I didn't expect him to be so fast. He was accidentally attacked by Beard due to his carelessness. Fortunately, in desperation, Karen used an iron block and a golden bell. Otherwise, if he had endured the blow, he would have died or been disabled. The teacher is right. Although the power of hatred is powerful, it is also easy to be swayed by it. Alas, I'm afraid I will be scolded to death by teacher Zifa this time. Fortunately Rosinandi is fine, otherwise. Karen didn't dare to think about it, and slowly walked out of the ruins, her eyes clearing. This beast is a devil fruit user and is very fast. Leave it to me. Smoker spat out and snorted coldly. This guy is the leader of the Blade Pirates, right? Why should I leave it to you? Just because you are in such a mess right now. Thank you, please. Karen solemnly thanked Smoker. Snort. Damn you brat. What do you think I am? Beard said angrily. He vowed to cut these little devils into pieces. Let them understand the cost of underestimating themselves. Call out. Beard's eyes flashed coldly, and his body was like a sharp arrow that shot out at Smoker. Look at the sword. Karen swung the Tibetan feng and slashed down hard. The next moment, Beard's body suddenly appeared in front of Karen. He knelt down on one leg, raised his hands high, and took the hidden front. It is powerful to be 100% caught with bare hands, but it has a fatal flaw, that is, Karen himself is also charged in the same place. This time the opponent is different from the opponents Karen faced before. He is a devil fruit user. So Beard still had the ability to resist. Although he didn't understand why he suddenly appeared in front of Karen and couldn't move his hands and legs, his tongue could still move. With a sudden force, the sharp sword in his tongue stabbed Karen hard. Karen quickly drew his sword, blocked the swift blow, and flew back at the same time. Why am I here? Beard looked at Karen who was retreating in shock, and said in disbelief, you are also a devil fruit user. Naturally, Karen would not explain anything to Beard. The sword edge turned and struck Beard hard on the body. Beard hurriedly raised his sword to resist, thinking that he suddenly appeared next to Karen, a feeling of fear emerged in his heart. He himself is a devil fruit user, so he clearly knows how weird and powerful devil fruit abilities are. Especially a devil fruit user whose name I don't know. At this moment, he had no intention of fighting and just wanted to get out of here quickly. In a battle between strong men, mentality is very important. Beard naturally knows this. He tried several times in succession, but seeing that he could not get rid of Karen and Karen did not use his devil fruit ability, Beard became more and more courageous as he fought. The battle continues, and every confrontation is accompanied by the crisp sound of swords and sparks flying. Beard flicked away Cullen's sword, panted heavily, and said with a ferocious smile, I don't know how you managed to make me suddenly appear in front of you, but that's it. As he spoke, Beard lay on the ground, his legs expanding continuously, his toes gripping the ground, and the terrifying force made the ground full of cracks. GGG, this is my strongest blow. I originally wanted to use it on Whitebeard. You are lucky. Chapter 33. Seeing and Hearing Color. Use it on Whitebeard? Karen's mouth twitched slightly, feeling amused at Beard's ignorance. He concentrated all his energy and stared at Beard vigilantly, and now he did not dare to be careless at all. When Beard was about to use all his strength to deal with Karen, Scott had already drawn his long knife and led his pirates to surround Smoker and Rosinandi. Ha ha ha, kids, follow me and kill them. The pirates smiled strangely, and when they saw Karen being dragged by their captain, cruel looks burst out on their faces. Gilu gilu. Beard's mouth bulged like a real toad, and his eyes flashed. Bounce blitz. His thick feet suddenly exerted force, and the terrifying force caused a huge hole to form where he originally stood. Call out. As fast as lightning, Karen's pupils shrank, and he quickly raised his sword to block. The sound of weapons clashing was endless. Under Beard's fierce offensive, Karen could only keep retreating and resist with difficulty. Beard's speed exceeded Karen's imagination and could not be caught with the naked eye. At this critical moment of life and death, his thinking became calmer. The reason why he can still resist now is entirely because he has used all 5 senses to return life. In the fierce battle, Karen's eyes gradually became focused and sharp. His body instinctively responded to every attack from the enemy, but his heart seemed to have entered an ethereal state. As the battle progressed, Karen began to notice a strange feeling. He could vaguely feel Beard's breath and movements, as if he could predict his next move. This feeling was weak at first, but became stronger and stronger as time went by. Is this seeing and hearing? Karen had a guess in her mind, and sure enough, fighting is the best teacher. Luffy learned simple three-color haki after studying with Rayleigh for 2 years, but under the stick education of Mr. Kaido, the three sticks learned Conqueror's entanglement. With the awakening of the color of knowledge, Karen's every block and dodge became easier. But he didn't seize the time to fight back. Instead, he closed his eyes and let himself become more familiar with the feeling of seeing, hearing, and seeing during the battle. Slowly, Beard's offensive slowed down. In this state, his physical strength was extremely exhausted. Hu-fu-fu. Beard gasped, his eyes full of disbelief. You must know that in this state, even he himself can't judge his own attack. How is it possible? Why can you see my attack clearly? Karen slowly opened his eyes, stood with his sword in hand, and said calmly, haha, nothing is impossible. Look at yourself, you are really a frog in the well. Impossible, I don't believe it, no one can escape my attack. Beard broke down and yelled. Karen shook his head, with a faint smile in his eyes, and said lightly. Do you have any other skills? If not, it's my turn. Beard forced himself to wake up from the collapse, and his eyes gradually became clear. It doesn't matter, even if my attack doesn't work, he still can't hit me. Lao Zi is a devil fruit user. No one can stop him from running away. What about his crew? This was beyond the scope of his thinking. With his thoughts at this point, Beard hurriedly turned around, his legs suddenly exerted force, and he ran away to the edge of the island. Oh, you want to run? Karen was not surprised by Beard's choice. He raised the hidden sword in his hand and swung it downwards. Look at the sword. The next moment, Beard, who was running, appeared in front of Karen, kneeling on one knee and holding a sword in both hands. Damn you brat! The luck in Beard's heart was gone, and the long tongue from his mouth burst out towards Karen. Karen snorted coldly, turned the hidden sword in his hand, and a scarlet tongue dropped from the air with a western sword. Beard covered his mouth in pain and looked at Karen in fear. Karen slowly walked towards Beard, holding up his hidden front, and his cold eyes made Beard's legs wet. Gurgulu, gulu. Beard fell to his knees and kept praying. He had seen the same scene when Karen first came to this world, but his grandfather of this world was kneeling down. Ha ha ha, when you killed people, didn't you think that you would also be killed? Karen's eyes flashed with pain, unmoved, and slowly walked towards Beard. Poof! There was a flash of sword light, and Beard's head fell heavily. His eyes widened with fear. Scarlet blood sprayed on Karen's cheek, making Karen's expression become ferocious. This was Karen's first time to kill someone, but he didn't feel the nausea of killing, only the pleasure of getting revenge. At this moment, he suddenly wanted to light a cigarette. He suddenly understood why there were so many smoking enthusiasts in Marine. He touched his pockets and found that he had not the habit of carrying cigarettes casually. Slowly exhaling, Karen looked around. At this time, Zifa and the recruit students also rushed to the battlefield and were commanding the battlefield in an orderly manner. He didn't do it himself. After all, one of the purposes of recruiting students was to train them in blood. The recruits brought by Zifa are all the elites among the elites. After rigorous training and testing, their strength and fighting qualities are undoubtedly top-notch. They will never be inferior when facing pirates. So Zifa is not worried that the students are no match for the pirates. With Beard's death, the pirates fighting Marine gradually lost their morale, and they screamed and tried to escape one by one. Run quickly, the captain is dead. How is it possible that the captain was killed by that Marine brat? As the first pirate escaped, the pirates who were still resisting were scattered like hosens after a tree fell, gradually losing their ability to resist. Smoker didn't know when he gave up the mace and took out the 10 hands that Karen was quite familiar with. At this time, he was fighting with Scott. One of them used 10 hands and the other held a long knife. Every time they fought, there was a crisp sound of steel and sparks flying. After all, Smoker is an elite member of the Marine Corps. In addition, Scott heard about the death of his captain, and he slowly showed signs of fatigue. It was obvious that in a few rounds, he would be defeated by Smoker's 10 men. Karen naturally wanted to take action against the enemy in front of him, but when he saw that it was Smoker who was fighting Scott, he felt a little embarrassed. Seeing that Scott was about to lose to Smoker, Karen shouted anxiously, "Smoker, leave your opponent to me." Without waiting for Smoker to answer, he waved his hidden sword and Scott's figure appeared in front of Karen. Smoker, who was in the middle of a battle, looked at Karen blankly. He was about to collapse. Why was Karen taking away every time he chose an opponent? So he shouted angrily, "Karen, you!" Just when I was about to say don't bully others too much, I noticed that Karen's scarlet eyes revealed a strong murderous intent. He has never seen Karen like this. In his heart, Karen has always been a somewhat funny and peaceful person. Swallowing a gulp of saliva and cursing in his heart, Smoker looked for his next target again. Damn, this guy is so secretive. I don't usually see him being so crazy. Chapter 34. For Justice. With a blur in front of his eyes, Scott found himself kneeling beside Karen at some point. Facing Karen's cold eyes, Scott trembled all over, his frightened eyes kept dodging. He slammed his forehead on the ground, his voice full of fear, "Please, let me go." Karen's voice seemed to come from hell, without any emotion, "You also know how to be afraid. When an old man begs you for mercy, why don't you let him go?" "I'm sorry, I was wrong, I know I was wrong." Scott didn't dare to raise his head and kept begging for mercy. Karen had a vague smile on her lips, and there was a hint of mystery in her eyes. He whispered softly, as if he was telling a secret that only he knew, "You know, you were almost able to find me at that time. It was just a little bit away from you being able to end my life. If you had found me at that time, if I kill me, maybe you won't be the one who dies today." Scott's begging voice paused, and he looked up at Karen, his eyes filled with regret. Of course, he did not regret his act of massacre, but regretted why he did not search carefully in the first place and left such a flame of revenge. Karen was very satisfied with Scott's expression. He just wanted Scott to die in regret and fear. Karen slowly walked towards Scott, put Zhang Feng on his neck, and rubbed it slowly like a not-so-sharp saw. This touch is not a sting, but a kind of hair-raising torture. Scott felt the friction on his neck, his whole body froze, and he slowly lowered his head, his face twisted with fear, but he did not dare to moan. Out of sight of Karen, Scott slowly and cautiously pulled out a sharp dagger from his sleeve. There was a fierce light in his eyes, revealing the malice hidden deep in his heart. His begging for mercy was his disguise. He knew that Karen would not let him go. His real purpose was to attack and kill Karen before he could react. Even if he died, he would scrape off a piece of Karen's body. Pfft! Knowing that he couldn't survive, he held the hidden edge in his throat and rushed towards Karen. Naturally, he could not succeed. Karen knew the cruelty of pirates, so he had long been prepared for Scott's counterattack before his death. But he really didn't expect Scott to be so cruel. Seeing Scott holding his throat and howling in pain, Karen showed a trace of cruelty. Kicking Scott to the ground, holding a hidden blade, he scratched Scott's skin bit by bit. He was like an artist, constantly perfecting his work. Kill me, kill me." The painful wails spread throughout the battlefield, and the recruit who was at the same time as Karen silently looked at Karen who was like a madman, with awe in his eyes. "What's wrong with Karen?" Tina walked to Zifa and asked worriedly. Zifa blew out a puff of snow-white smoke, sighed, and said slowly. "Alas, this pirate group massacred Karen's hometown. There is no one left alive in the town." Tina's eyes widened, her mouth opened slightly, as if she wanted to say something but couldn't make a sound. She didn't know how to comfort Karen, so she just stood there quietly, looking at him with concerned eyes, hoping to bring him a little warmth and comfort. Smoker also heard Zifa's words, and his anger towards Karen gradually calmed down. Rosinandi walked towards Zifa, glanced at Karen who was creating, and asked in a deep voice, "Don't worry about it, I feel that Karen's state is very wrong. It's okay, just let him vent." Zifa shook his head, looked around, and said seriously, "How is the battle going?" "Report to the teacher. All pirates have been annihilated." Tina looked back at Karen, gave Zifa a military salute, and reported. "Are there any casualties?" "There were 5 minor injuries and no deaths." "Very good." Zifa nodded, which was pretty much what he expected. He looked at the idle recruit with a sullen face. "What? If you kill the pirates, everything will be fine? Why don't you quickly check to see if there are any survivors?" "Yes. The recruits no longer wanted to stay here any longer. They all stood up straight and ran towards the thick smoke. Zifa looked at Tina, who looked worried, and said softly, "You can go too, don't worry about Karen, I'm here, everything will be fine." Tina's cheeks turned red and she hesitated. No. No, Tina is not worried about Karen. Zifa looked at Tina leaving in a funny way, and then turned his attention to Karen again. At this time, Scott's moans had disappeared, he was dead, and the air was terrifyingly quiet, with only the sound of burning fire and the sound of sharp blades slicing across his skin. Oh, Zifa quickly walked towards Karen, grabbed Karen's wrist that wanted to continue waving, and said in a deep voice, "That's enough, he is already dead." Karen's face was full of exhaustion and numbness, as if he had lost his soul. He turned his head stiffly and looked at Zifa, and said in a hoarse voice, "Oh, are you dead? What a pity." Zifa looked at Karen quietly, his eyes full of pity and comfort, and patted Karen's shoulder gently, trying to convey some warmth and strength, and whispered, "Yes, Karen, it's over. You've had your revenge." Karen trembled slightly, and his voice was low and weak, "Really, everything is over." Zifa sighed and said in a deep voice, "Your life should not just revolve around hatred, there are more things worth pursuing. Let go of the pain of the past, look forward, and find new hope and justice." Karen raised his head and stared at the teacher who cared about him. His face was covered with traces of time, and his wrinkles were as crisscross as ravines. There was a deep and firm light in his eyes, as if he had experienced countless wind and rain. He is no longer young, but exudes a calm and sophisticated temperament. This Marine general is also burdened with hatred, which is his persistence in justice and his hatred of evil. His expression is serious and solemn, and every wrinkle seems to tell the story of his past struggle and persistence. Karen could feel the strength deep in his heart, the determination to do whatever it took for his beliefs. Compared to his own hatred, Zifa's hatred is the deepest. Feeling the power coming from Zifa, Karen's eyes gradually became clear and firm. He exhaled a long breath and tried to calm down his emotions. He showed a firm smile to Zifa and said in a deep voice, "I understand, teacher, for justice." Chapter 35. Good Marine. The next day, dawn. The fire has been put out, because Marine arrived in time, and the town was not destroyed like the town of Srili. Under the leadership of Zifa and Jun, Marine soldiers quickly organized and carried out cleanup and rescue work. At this time, Karen was lying in the medical room of the warship. In the battle with Beard, although he did not suffer any serious injuries, he was still mentally exhausted. Putting the apple on the bedside into his mouth, Karen slowly sat up. This battle was more difficult than he expected, but the rewards it brought him were huge. Closing his eyes, Karen carefully felt the changes brought about by seeing and hearing the color. His 5 senses became very sensitive, including the sound of sea water hitting the warship in his ears, the changes in airflow, and the smell of food that kept teasing Karen's nose. Gulu gulu. Opening his eyes, he has always been hungry easily since he learned to return life. Hunger is a good thing, it means his body has a huge need for energy. Holding his stomach, Karen stood up and walked towards the source of the delicious food. Walking into the canteen, it was full of people. Karen attracted everyone's attention as soon as she came over. The noisy voices became quieter, and they still remembered Karen's cruelty on the battlefield. "It seems that I was really cruel at that time." Thinking of his method of dealing with Scott, Karen smiled bitterly in his heart. Speaking of this, he was also very puzzled. He had only known the grandfather in this body for 2 days. Logically speaking, although there was hatred, there would be no hatred. That's right. Could it be that he was influenced by the remaining soul of the original owner? Karen shook his head with a headache and randomly tested in his mind. It was not impossible. "I have avenged you, and it's time for you to rest in peace." Karen secretly thought in his heart. As he said these words, he seemed to feel a little lighter, whether it was a psychological effect or not. The burden of hatred disappeared at this moment, and he felt an indescribable comfort welling up in his heart. Taking a long breath, Karen ordered meals for a dozen people in a row and turned into a glutton to devour the food. After burping, Karen walked towards the deck under the shocked eyes of the Marines. "Karen." As soon as he reached the plywood, a voice of surprise came to Karen's ears. Karen turned around and saw that it was Rocinante. "How are you?" Rocinante asked with concern. "I'm fine. Do you have a cigarette?" Karen asked with a grin. He originally didn't want his body to get into the bad habit of smoking, but after the previous battle, he found that it was still necessary. Ah! Rocinante was stunned, rummaging through his pockets, and finally smiled awkwardly, well, I don't smoke. A marine who doesn't smoke is not a good marine. Karen walked towards Rocinante, reached out and patted his shoulder, teasingly. Is it? Is there such a thing? Rocinante Jonger was confused. Yeah, look at Teacher Zifa, Major General Huashaishan, and Dominic Instructor, each of them is a big smoker. Karen held back her smile and talked nonsense seriously. It's true. Rocinante nodded thoughtfully. Ladies' cigarette, do you want it? At some point, Tina came to the two of them and took out a white cigarette from her pocket. Yes. Karen took the cigarette from Tina's hand, took one out and put it in his mouth, while not forgetting to throw one to Rocinante. Is there a fire? Karen looked at Tina and said sheepishly. Tina rolled her eyes at Karen, then took out a lighter from her pocket and threw it at Karen. Karen took the lighter, lit it for Rocinante, and finally lit it for himself, took a deep breath, and put the lighter into his pocket. A set of small combos is extremely smooth. The smoke smell of women's cigarettes is much lighter than that of men's cigarettes, and the flavor is mint, which is perfect for people like Karen who don't smoke much. A cigarette after a meal is better than a living god. Karen sighed as she exhaled a puff of white smoke. Tina walked towards Karen, stretched out her hand and looked at Karen. Karen asked in surprise, what's wrong? Lighter. Tina stared at Karen with a stern face. Karen smiled awkwardly, ha ha ha, don't be so stingy, I will use this first, and when I have time to buy you one, I will return it to you. After saying that, without waiting for Tina to reply, he slapped his head and said, well, Teacher Zifa said that when I wake up, he asked me to find him. I'll go first, you guys are busy. With that said, he walked quickly towards Zifa's room. Tina looked at Karen who was escaping in a funny way, with the corners of her mouth raised slightly. Buy me one? After getting rid of Tina and arriving on the deck of the second floor of the warship, Karen unexpectedly found Zifa watching the busy people at the railing on the second floor. Hearing Karen's footsteps, he said calmly without looking back, are you here? Looking at the slightly lonely Zifa, Karen nodded, with an evil thought in his mind, and said calmly, I'm here. You brat, come here as soon as you come. Why are you standing so far away? Zifa turned around and cursed with a smile. Seeing that Zifa was not cooperating, Karen nodded in frustration and walked to Zifa's side unhurriedly. What are you doing, are you in a bad mood? Zifa turned his attention back to the busy marine. It's a bit uncomfortable. Looking at the ruins of the town in the distance and listening to the crying that came from time to time, Karen took a deep breath from the cigarette, and the white smoke slowly drifted in the air. Just get used to it. Zifa's expression could not be seen clearly, and his voice was a little tired. Are you used to it? Karen solemnly looked at Zifa's side face and asked. Zifa's lips moved slightly, but he didn't make any sound. There was a flash of pain and helplessness in his eyes, and the destruction and injury caused by the war will always be deep in his heart. Karen stared at Zifa, and he understood that Zifa could not get used to it. Being accustomed to the cruelty of war meant indifference to human nature and indifference to life. Zifa turned his head, the sea breeze blew the corners of his clothes, his eyes were firm and serious, his voice echoed in the sea breeze, with a heavy sense of mission, this is the meaning of marine, to eliminate pirates and not let them people are harmed. Karen stared blankly at Zifa's determined pupils and nodded slowly. Okay, I didn't ask you to come to me just to talk about this. Zifa put away the solemn expression on his face, and his eyes gradually became gentle. Oh, what's the matter? Karen asked curiously. Have you awakened your knowledge and knowledge? Chapter 36. Domineering. As if he was afraid that Karen would not understand, Zifa explained, it is a very wonderful feeling. To put it simply, it is a super sense that is born when the five senses become sharper. You can sense attacks, predict the opponent's next moves, and sense the opponent's strength. Karen nodded solemnly, yes, I realized this state during the battle with Beard. Although he had long expected Karen's awakening, he was still full of shock when he saw Karen nodding in recognition. Awakening Haki is not as difficult as Conquerors, but those who can awaken Haki are very rare, not to mention those who can awaken it in just one battle. What a genius! Zifa sighed and nodded with satisfaction. Since you have awakened the haki of wisdom and color, I will tell you the other two training methods of haki. Karen concentrated and made a gesture of listening carefully. Ahem, domineering is the potential power possessed by all human beings. This innate ability is the three powers of spirit, strength, and soul in human beings. People call it domineering. However, the vast majority of people are not aware of this power, or they are unable to exert it throughout their lives. These three domineering colors are the seeing color that represents the spirit, the armed color that represents strength, and the conqueror's color that represents the soul. Zifa paused as he spoke, looked at Karen who was listening carefully, and continued, you have awakened to the color of knowledge. I believe you also felt his subtlety in the previous battle. Don't be complacent. There are levels of domineering. What you awakened before was just the initial stage of seeing and hearing. Advanced haki can predict the future, and a more powerful one can even feel the other person's thoughts and emotions, and convey the user's own consciousness to others, affecting the minds and thoughts of others and generating strong resonance, and even it can change the other party's values and ideology. But this kind of knowledge is usually innate, and there is no way to achieve this through training. Karen, who can predict the future, knows that it is Wang Lufiai's teacher Ka-er. As for changing other people's minds, Princess Odo Him of Mermaid Island in the deep sea once used it. That is a kind of haki that is rarer than conquerors. As for the armed color, it can improve personal defense, acting like invisible armor. It can also evolve into attack power, and then compete with devil fruit users, and can even touch the entity of Logia fruit users. You left the military academy. The Dominic who fought with you before will be armed and domineering. At this point, Zifa slapped himself on the head. Forgot, you haven't seen the power of the Logia fruit yet. Let me tell you this, when you don't know how to arm yourself with haki, when you meet Logia's opponent, your attack will be like water off a duck's back. But you don't have to worry. Logia fruits are very rare, even in our marines. But they are all very powerful people without exception. It's a pity that you have already eaten the devil fruit, otherwise, alas. Zifa shook his head in annoyance. It's okay, I quite like my word fruit. Most people thought he was eating the paramecia devil fruit, so he naturally wouldn't deny it. The corners of Karen's mouth turned up and she smiled. Oh, you don't know how powerful the Logia fruit is, otherwise you will definitely regret it. Zifa smiled helplessly. He did not eat the devil fruit because he was very confident in his domineering power. But that's okay. Without the Logia fruit, you won't rely too much on the ability of the devil fruit. You must know that in this sea, domineering overpowers everything. Karen was non-committal about Zifa's statement. Before the domineering force appeared, the sense of oppression brought by the natural system was indeed very strong. It's just a pity that each version has its own god. Who would have imagined that there are phantom beast species in the animal system? The phantom beast species fruit can not only bring a powerful physique to the user, but also bring elemental attacks of 5 flowered 8 gates. The emergence of phantom beasts makes Logia seem like a joke. In the later stage, other elements were better. Burn the fruit. Looking at Karen who looked indifferent, Zifa secretly made up his mind. When this matter was over and he returned to Marine headquarters, he would ask Porisalino to come over and let Karen see the power of Logia. As for why Porisalino was chosen instead of someone else, it was because he was afraid that Sakaski would strike too hard. Kuzan should have been a good candidate originally, but it was a pity that after O'Hara's incident, he changed from his original burning justice has become lazy justice. Now Kuzan often rides his bicycle to travel in the sea, and it is difficult to see him at ordinary times. Although Porisalino is also unconventional, he is still very responsible as long as he is working. Moreover, Porisalino's battle is very unique. Compared with his physical and ability offensive, his verbal offensive is equally powerful. Thinking that Karen was going to be disgusted by Porisalino, Zifa laughed out loud. Ha ha ha, cough, okay, the next thing I want to talk about is that there are also high-level armed colors, divided into 3 types. The first is entanglement hardening. You can wrap yourself with armed domineering energy. It can make your body harder than steel and improve your defense and attack power. In addition to using it on your own body, you can also use it on objects. There are many a skill that every swordsman must master. The second is to flow outward, where the body's unnecessary armed domineering flow is wrapped around the hands or weapons and released, directly evolving into substantial attack power or defense power. It can hit the enemy with a powerful impact, and can also forming a protective wall. It can even defend against invisible attacks. This kind of domineering power is called Luiying in Wano. The third type is internal destruction. It can disseminate the armed color outward and pass through the surface of the object, directly destroying the interior of the object. It is a very terrifying attack method. These are the application skills of advanced armed colors. You need to master the basic armed colors and then explore by yourself. As for how to learn armed colors, it is very simple. Unlike the knowledge colors, which require talent, armed colors require constant beatings. As long as you are physically strong enough. If you are strong, you can learn, and many people in the new world can. So next I will arrange for you to conduct actual combat training with different armed warriors. You must be prepared. Karen nodded solemnly and said excitedly, I understand, teacher. He naturally yearns for armed domineering, which is a skill that must be mastered to become a strong man. Without the weapon color, you are not qualified to enter the new world. Well, in addition to the two above, there is another one called Conqueror's Haki. Zifa suddenly sighed and took out a cigar from his arms. Karen quickly used the lighter that came along to help Zifa light it. Zifa looked at Karen in surprise, smiled and cursed, when did you learn this? Hey, training is too stressful, so occasionally light a lighter to cushion the pressure. Karen put the lighter into his pocket and said sheepishly. Really? Zifa was non-committal, exhaling a puff of white smoke and continued. The third type of haki is Conqueror's Haki. Chapter 37. Clean up. Conqueror's Haki is different from the other two types of haki. You can learn the Conqueror's Haki as long as you practice hard, and Conqueror's Haki is not available to everyone. If you want to learn Conquerors, you must have a strong consciousness. It can be said that those who have Conqueror's Haki, everyone has the qualifications to become a king. This kind of haki is rare in our marines. As far as I know, the guy from Sengoku has this talent. Even I don't have Conqueror's Haki. Zifa shook his head and said distressedly. Is it justice to rule the world? Karen thought of the justice of the Warring States period and murmured. With the qualifications of a king, it seems that if you want to have Conqueror's domineering power, you have to think about what kind of king you want to be. Karen naturally yearns for Conqueror's domineering power, but unfortunately at present he only has the idea of becoming stronger, not of becoming a king. I don't know if I will have the chance to awaken Conquerors in the future. Those who possess Conquerors are, without exception, the strongest among the strongest in this world. Zifa patted Karen on the shoulder and continued, Conquerors is also a very powerful attack method. People who possess Conquerors, it gives people a strong sense of oppression by nature, and a few people can even wrap Conquerors around their attacks, just like a weapon. Okay, it's useless to say this. Just be careful if you meet someone who uses Conquerors in the future. Seeing that Karen looked a little disappointed, Zifa changed the topic of Conquerors and continued, I called you here today, mainly to tell you how to learn armed colors. Karen put away the messy emotions in her heart and said doubtfully, didn't you say that just being beaten is fine? Hi, stupid. Zifa patted Karen's shoulder heavily and said in a deep voice, that's just a way to speed up learning, there is another way. What method? Karen asked curiously. In his previous life, he had seen Luffy practicing haki. It was similar to what Zifa said. He only needed to be beaten constantly and his body could consciously form protection. Are you able to use iron blocks proficiently now? Zifa narrowed his eyes slightly and asked. Okay, does the training of armed colors have something to do with iron blocks? As he said this, Karen tensed up and used the iron blocks. Yes, the iron block can be said to be the lower level replacement of the armed color. You can't move when you use the iron block now. Zifa said lightly. Karen's mind moved, and he tried to move while using the iron block. After trying for a while, he shook his head in frustration, but did not give up and continued to try. Ha ha ha, it's a good thing you can't, otherwise I would be scared to death by you. Zifa looked at the motionless Karen and laughed. The next moment, Zifa's smile froze on his face. Because when he discovered the iron block used by Karen, he actually moved his steps slightly. I succeeded. Karen said in surprise and asked, Teacher, what did you say? Are you really a genius? Zifa murmured with his mouth wide open. Karen used life return to control his body, and slowly moved a few steps. Suddenly his face was covered in sweat. He put away the iron block and panted. Haha, how's it going? Is that so? Zifa silently blew out a smoke ring, coughed slightly, and said with a strange expression, yes, I really have talent. This is also a way to train armed colors. Remember to practice more when you go back. He didn't expect the slap in the face to come so quickly. As soon as he said Karen couldn't, he succeeded. This sudden reversal caught him off guard. There was joy in Karen's success in his eyes, but also a trace of annoyance that he had been too sure just now. He coughed lightly, ahem, okay, you can go back. Karen put away his excited expression and thanked Zifa, okay, thank you teacher. It's getting dark. Zifa and Jun have led Marine to complete the finishing work. Because he was specially bringing recruits for actual combat, Zifa did not plan to stay in this sea area for too long. After informing the headquarters of the situation on the island, Zifa led Karen and the others back to Marin Fendo. The return journey went very smoothly, and there was no one with no eyesight who shouted at the ship to approach it. Stepping onto the land of Marin Fendo, Karen took a deep breath. This trip to sea brought me great rewards. Not only did he take revenge personally, but he also realized the domineering power of seeing and hearing color in the battle, and even stepped towards the door of learning armed color with Zifa's advice. After saying goodbye to Zifa, Tina and the others, Karen planned to go back to the dormitory and take a hot bath to wash away the fatigue of the past 2 days. Callan, right. Just as he was about to leave, a sassy voice stopped him. Damn it, how could I forget her? Karen turned around stiffly and said with a smile, Jun-senpai, are you okay? Haha, little brother, it's nothing. I just remind you to come to the training ground on number 15 tomorrow. Jun said with a smile. I know. Meeting Jun's eyes, Karen couldn't help but shudder, and cold sweat dropped. Remember to be energetic and clean tonight. My sister will love you well tomorrow. Jun walked towards Karen and tapped Karen's chest with his green fingers. Who is that? He can actually win the favor of Major General Jun. No. Jun, my goddess. Damn it, find out what this kid's name is, I'm going to beat him up. Feeling the malicious eyes around her, Karen wanted to cry without tears. Revenge, absolutely revenge. During the 2 days of recuperation on the warship, Karen thought that Jun had forgotten about him. What a witch! Sister, don't you know how ambiguous what you said is? Those who didn't know thought we were going to do something tomorrow. What? Isn't there a special training tomorrow? Karen spoke righteously and said loudly. What? It turns out it's just special training. Isn't that right? Why do you want him to be cleaned during special training? Maybe Major General Jun hates the bad smell. Hearing the random speculation around him, Karen breathed a sigh of relief. Jun is not only one of the best swordsmen in Marine, with countless admirers, but Jun's background is terrifying. This is a master named Garp Little Garp. Karen clearly remembers that Jun is the sister of Commander Tsuru. Counselor, he is a woman who makes Doflamingo run away. Really? I'm looking forward to tomorrow. Jun took a step back and smiled at Karen. I'm looking forward to it too. Chapter 38. Big Belly. The next morning. Elite Training School. Perhaps due to the spread last night, many Marines heard that Jun was going to personally teach recruit swordsmanship, and the place was crowded with people. I just don't know if they really want to see the swordsmanship or Jun himself. He is Karen. He looks very young. This guy just messed with Miss Tina, and now he hooked up with Major General Jun. What a scumbag. I heard that Major General Jun took the initiative to find him. What's good about him is that he's a little more handsome than me, isn't he? Karen has been waiting here early. After all, it is very ungentlemanly to make a beautiful woman wait. Because Karen is now far ahead of Marine at the same time, Zifa told him on the way back that he can train freely in the future and does not need to report to Zifa every day. He couldn't hide his excitement at the thought of fighting against top swordsmen. This was the benefit of joining Marine. Not only could he learn various fighting techniques, but he could also have masters teach him moves. Automatically blocking out the sour sounds around him, Karen did a few warm-up moves at will and just waited. After waiting for a while, Karen saw Jun's tall figure and walked over slowly. She was wearing Major General Marine's cloak of justice, and the peach-colored short skirt couldn't hide the whiteness on her chest. The spider tattoos on her long white legs made her temperament a bit more enchanting. She seemed to be in a good mood, with a faint smile on her lips. To Karen's expectation, she was followed by a wretched-looking uncle, Cake, who, like Jun, was a future general candidate. "Jun, why are you interested in that brat?" Jiaji looked at Karen and said distressedly. "Teacher Zifa asked me to give guidance to Karen. Besides, it seems that who I am interested in has nothing to do with you." Jun put away the smile on his face and said angrily, "Also, why are you following me? I remember you have a mission today." Jiaji scratched the back of his head, licked his face and said, "No, there is no mission. I also want to see this year's elite students." "Really?" Jun was non-committal, helpless about the addition, looked around, frowned slightly, then looked at Karen who was doing stretching exercises on the side, his eyes lit up, and he said with a smile, "Karen." Karen stopped his movements and touched his nose. "Major General Jun." Jun frowned slightly and said with a half-smile, "I called her sister last night. Why are you so outspoken today?" "What? Last night? Called sister?" Before Karen could answer, Jiaji looked shocked and lost his voice. At this moment, he felt like his sky was falling. He didn't expect that so many things would happen in just a few days. Jun looked at Cake coldly, glared at Cake, and said in a deep voice, "What? Isn't it possible?" Cake was startled by Jun's cold eyes and stammered, "But, it's okay." Then he turned his attention to Karen and looked at Karen seriously. Her short golden hair shone dazzlingly in the sun, her eyes were firm and bright, and there was a faint smile at the corner of her mouth. The more he looked, the more familiar he felt, and he felt like he had seen Karen somewhere. With a thought, he remembered, wasn't this the kid who made a high-profile confession in the cafeteria that day? He had also used Karen's method on Jun. Thinking of this, he felt a slight pain coming from his abdomen. "It's you." Jiaji walked quickly towards Karen and exclaimed. Karen looked at Jiaji blankly. He didn't remember seeing Jiaji, and said blankly, "Is it me?" "Huh? Do you know Karen?" Jun looked at Karen and then at Keiki, curiously. "I know, it's him who made my belly so big." Jiaji covered his bulging belly and shouted through gritted teeth. "Ah!" Jun looked at Karen and Keiki strangely, as if he had discovered some great secret. Hey, uncle, you can eat whatever you want, but you can't talk nonsense. Why do you mean I made your belly so big?" Karen's face was full of black lines, he couldn't bear it, and he spoke angrily. He wanted prestige, and he could accept the stigma, but he definitely couldn't accept this kind of stigma. No, it's not him, it's you." Keiki also found that what he said was pleasant, so he looked at Jun and said. The Marines who came here to watch all had their eyes widened and their heads stretched out, looking at the three of them in shock. In my mind, I couldn't help but think of the triangle story between Kaji, Jun, and Karen. Major General Jiaji has thick eyebrows and big eyes. I didn't expect him to be so open-minded. Wow, I didn't expect Major General Jun to be so big. At this moment, their hearts were broken. Jun's vision went dark, and he took out the famous sword Kimpira in his hand, gritted his silver teeth, and roared, "What are you talking about?" Cake felt Jun's anger, and took a few steps back unconsciously, and stammered, I mean it was the confession method he taught me. After I used it, I was beaten by you." Jun put away his anger, looked at Cake's belly thoughtfully, and said angrily, "Don't say half the words and leave the other half." "No, uncle, who are you? Do I know you very well? When did I teach you?" Karen said with an innocent look. "You said it wasn't you, Marine Restaurant, who made the announcement." Jiaji said bitterly. I confessed my love, but I didn't teach you." Karen looked embarrassed, but he didn't expect this matter to have such a big impact. "If it weren't for you, I wouldn't." Jiaji looked aggrieved. "That's enough." Jun interrupted Cake and said angrily, "Are you very free?" Jiaji was startled. "If you have nothing to do, don't interfere with my guidance of the juniors." Jun pointed to an open space next to him and said to Karen, "Okay, ignore this idiot, let's go there to train." "Okay." Karen nodded, walked slowly to the open space next to him, smiled at Jun and said, "Do you want to use a wooden sword?" "No, just use the sword you have and attack me with all your strength. Jun said calmly with a confident smile. Karen drew out the Zhangfeng, the fighting spirit burning in his heart. He gently supported the Zhangfeng, his eyes were sharp, and he said without any emotion, "This sword is called Zhangfeng. It is 4 feet long and is made of 1,000-year-old cold iron." In fact, he didn't know what material Zhangfeng was made of, but he just thought it was very impressive to shout out. Jun looked at Karen in silence, who seemed to have changed into a different person, and said strangely, "My sword is called Jinpira, let's do it." Crescent Moon Celestial. The sword light flashed past like lightning, and the sharp sword energy drew a dazzling arc in the air, heading straight towards Jun. Naturally, Karen would not be 100% caught with bare hands, as that would have no effect on actual combat. Well done! A trace of surprise flashed in Jun's eyes, and he directly used the weapon color to wrap Jinpira, and flew out with the same slash. One blade style spider flash. Chapter 39. Applying for graduation. Karen lay on the ground exhausted, the entire ground soaked with sweat. Performing pretty well. Jun was also dripping with sweat and panting. Karen glanced at Jun standing next to her. Her long, snow-white legs looked even more dazzling under the sunlight. The skin on her legs exuded a porcelain-like luster, delicate and smooth. Her slender legs reminded people of elegant white swan. Closing his eyes, Karen ignored Jun and internally digested the fighting skills just now. Much longer lasting than the first time. Jun sat down next to Karen, her eyes sparkling with a charming light and a faint smile hanging on the corner of her mouth. Slowly stretching her body, like a graceful cat, every movement is full of provocation. Karen's throat felt dry unconsciously. She rolled her eyes at Jun and complained in her heart. "Isn't it just a training session? It's so exciting." Yes, it has been more than 2 months since the last special training for Jun to help Karen. During these 2 months, whenever Jun returned to Marin Fendo, he would find Karen for special training. It is worth mentioning that Jiaji will also come to the training ground from time to time to practice with Karen in the name of training his juniors. Not only Jun and Cake, Zifa also occasionally arranges other different major generals and lieutenants as Karen's actual combat targets. So these days, not only has Karen's strength grown rapidly, but he has also become somewhat famous among major generals and lieutenant generals. Many people know that Karen is Zifa's personal disciple. "Why are you so indifferent?" "Sister, I have been very tired these days. How can you compensate me?" Jun drew a circle on Karen's back with his finger and said with unclear meaning. Karen was shocked. Although this contact was not the first time, Karen felt an electric shock every time, and her hand holding Zhangfeng trembled slightly. Did Jun fall in love with me? Karen was thinking wildly in her mind. When Jun saw this, he laughed, his smile spread out, and the white on his chest swayed. Karen swallowed. Because of the training just now, his breathing was much heavier. "How about I treat you to dinner?" "It's just that," Jun's tone was a little disappointed. Then, he smiled faintly and opened his red lips slightly. "Okay. Thank you," Karen said suddenly. "Huh? Why are you talking about this?" Jun narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at Karen with a hint of danger. Karen quickly stood up and stretched out his left hand. Suddenly, a dark breath wrapped around Karen's left hand. After 2.5 months of hard work, Karen finally mastered armed color haki. "Did you succeed?" Jun looked at Karen in surprise. She didn't expect Karen to learn armed colors so quickly. "Yes." Karen's eyes were full of confidence. Jun said with a sense of loss, 2.5 months, it's so fast, what are you going to do?" Karen didn't answer in a hurry. With a thought, he opened the system interface in his mind. Target reputation, 9066/10,000. Budding marine talent. Skills acquired. Unrivaled skill, the first effect is to forcibly upgrade a skill you have mastered to the highest level, you have chosen to return your life. The second effect is that the more confident you shout out the move, the stronger the effect. 100% chance of being caught with bare hands, use sword weapons with both hands, look at a person, shout look at the sword and 100% chance of being caught by the opponent. In more than 2 months, his reputation has basically not increased much. The only fluctuation was the few days when Jun fought against him. But the increase was not as big as Karen imagined. After all, there were only so many people in the training camp, and not many people paid attention to these tidbits. Now that he has mastered the armed color, he has the capital to show his strength to the sea, so he is ready to apply to Zifa for early graduation. I plan to graduate early. Karen said truthfully. Well, your current strength has indeed reached the point of graduation. Jun nodded, not surprised by Karen's choice. He paused and continued, there is nothing left to teach you in the training camp. If you want to continue to become stronger, you can only continue to experience battles between life and death. Karen lowered his head and smiled lightly. Yes, that's my plan. Jun seemed not used to speaking with her head raised, so she also stood up, patted Karen's heavy shoulder, and said with a smile, I'm waiting for your good news. Are you sure you want to graduate early? You have just awakened your armed haki. Isn't it too early? Zifa looked at Karen with a complicated expression. He had known Karen for half a year. In the past few months, he had found many masters to compete with Karen in actual combat, so he understood the growth of Karen's strength. Now that Karen is almost as strong as a brigadier general in his headquarters, there will naturally be no problem for the brigadier general to go to sea. It's just that he hasn't seen anyone as talented as Karen for a long time, and he doesn't want Karen to die before he develops. The baby bird will one day fly alone away from its parents. Only by experiencing wind and rain can it become stronger. My training in the headquarters is of little significance now, so I think it is time to leave my parents and conduct my own trial. Karen met Zifa's eyes, and there was a dazzling light in his eyes, which was the determination to become stronger. Zifa looked at Karen blankly, took out a cigar from his arms, and Karen skillfully lit it for him. Will the baby bird eventually leave its parents? After a long time, Zifa let out a long sigh and said in a deep voice. Can. Without waiting for Karen's answer, he added, I can let you go and have your own experience, but you have to go through a test from me. A smile appeared on Karen's face and he said confidently, I promise to complete the task. Zifa chuckled, haha, I promised you in advance that this trial will be difficult. No matter how difficult it is, I will definitely finish it. Karen promised. Really? A strange smile appeared on Zifa's face. Seeing Zifa's old fox-like smile, Karen's heart suddenly skipped a beat and asked in a low voice, what on earth is it? Zifa laughed loudly, you will know when the time comes. Chapter 40. Ape God. Karen was led by Zifa to the training ground, which he was very familiar with because it was also the ground where he and Jun trained. It's just that it's more lively here than before. With just one glance, Karen discovered Jun, Cake and Huo Xiaoshan. They were standing aside and talking about something. Are you asking me to fight Jun and the others? Karen made random guesses in her mind. Ha ha ha, it's so lively here. Hearing the voice before seeing anyone, Garp grabbed a handful of donuts and stuffed them into his mouth. Well, I didn't expect even Xiao he was here. Sengoku, who was walking with Garp, had a flash in his eyes. He looked at Karen for a while, then for Jun, and finally focused on Crane with a smile on his lips. Ha ha ha, I haven't heard of a recruit who graduated early in many years. Everyone is very curious. Staff officer he also smiled and said, yes, I heard that this child is Zifa's favorite disciple. Then he turned his attention to Karen and asked Warring States, he is Karen, right? Warring States nodded, yes, he is a very talented young man. He looked at her carefully and smiled with satisfaction, I'm just a little young. Ha ha ha, Ziahe, are you old and confused? Recruit is certainly young. Garp stuffed another handful of donuts into his mouth and joked. I can't stop your mouth even if I eat. Sengoku stretched out his hand to take Garp's donuts, but Garp nimbly dodged it. He looked at Garp thoughtfully and asked, I heard from Sengoku that Karen is your relative. Well, that's right. Garp replied. Karen was introduced by Durag, so there is nothing wrong with saying he is a relative of his. Crane nodded, looking more and more satisfied with Karen's expression. Ha ha ha, Ziahe is here too. Zifa led Karen towards Sengoku and the others, and at the same time introduced to Karen, this is the Crane staff, and she is also Jun's sister. When saying this, Zifa also winked at Karen. Karen pretended not to notice Zifa's little move, gave a military salute to he, and smiled shyly, I've met staff he. He was silent for a while, well, not bad, he is much more polite than Zifa and Garp. Teacher Zifa and Lieutenant General Garp are seniors. Karen answered seriously. He laughed loudly, interesting. Then, she looked at Jun and said casually, I heard that Jun often teaches you swordsmanship recently. Well, Sister Jun's swordsmanship is superb, and I have learned a lot. Karen pondered for a while and said cautiously. Really? He looked again at Karen's pupils and asked, what do you think of Jun? Ah, Jun-san, very good. Karen, sweating like raindrops, answered bravely. I mean. He was mid-sentence when he was interrupted by a sassy voice, Sister He, why are you here too? Jun walked up to her long snow-white legs and shouted to Crane in surprise. I heard that there was a genius in this recruitment period, so I came here to take a look. He replied with a smile. Karen took this opportunity to quickly stand behind Zifa and asked in a low voice, Teacher, why are there so many people today? Zifa glanced at Karen and said angrily, Hey, isn't it because of you? Because of me? Karen looked stunned. Do you think it is so easy to graduate early? Zifa asked with a smile, what is your current position? Miscellaneous soldier. Karen didn't know what his position was. He remembered that the lowest position in the Marine Corps was a chore soldier, and he didn't remember that he had ever been promoted. Get lost. Zifa rolled his eyes and explained, you are now Seaman First Class. You are not qualified to lead warships to sea after graduation. So you asked the Warring States General. Karen's eyes lit up, is it to give me a promotion? Humph, you still have some brains. Zifa nodded. Thank you. Karen sincerely thanked Zifa, and then asked, so, what exactly is my assessment? Fighting Jun. Is this? Before Zifa finished speaking, he was attracted by the noisy voice of Marine around him. Seeing the person clearly, Zifa smiled and said, Hee, here he comes. Wow, isn't that Lieutenant General Porisalino? He's actually here too. I haven't seen Lieutenant General Porisalino for a long time. He is so handsome, screams. I heard that Lieutenant General Porisalino was sent to protect a particularly important person. As a star figure in Marine, Porisalino was heatedly discussed by Marine as soon as he appeared on the scene. Porisalino walked up to Zifa with a twitchy expression and said in a strange tone, is this my opponent? It's so scary, like a monster. Walk, ape god. This is a scary guy with a terrifying mouth and a supernova kick. He is the Marine general whose plot is the most unpredictable. Even now, Karen is still not sure whether Porisalino really let off steam when facing Luffy. Me? Against Porisalino? Teacher Zifa, are you kidding me? How virtuous and capable am I now? Karen looked at Porisalino approaching in shock, and Chunin couldn't help complaining in his heart. Turning his head stiffly and looking at Zifa, Karen asked unwillingly, Teacher, is this my opponent? Zifa nodded and said with a smile, yes, this is a suitable opponent that I spent a lot of energy to help you choose. Suitable opponent? Are you sure? Karen reasonably suspected that this was Zifa's plan to prevent him from graduating. Karen smiled and said, really? Thank you. Haha, Porisalino is not an ordinary lieutenant general, he is a candidate for general. Please be careful later. Zifa reminded kindly. So the graduation test is to defeat Porisalino. At this moment, Karen's face was ashen. What are you thinking about? Although your current strength is not bad, you better not think about defeating Porisalino. Zifa snorted and looked at Karen with a look like a fool. Hi. Then how to judge whether I passed the assessment? Karen exhaled, and her hanging heart returned to her stomach. It's very simple, Zifa smiled slyly and pointed at Garp, Sengoku and he, as long as they feel qualified. Karen looked at Zifa suspiciously, you didn't plan it in advance, did you? Go away. Am I that kind of person? Zifa shouted angrily. Okay. Sengoku had a dark look on his face and walked towards Zifa, interrupting the conversation between the two. He was afraid of damaging Marine's image if he continued. When does it start? We are very busy. That's it now. Zifa said seriously. Are there any rules? Porisalino pouted, speaking in a tone that made people want to slap him. There are no rules. You can use swordsmanship, physical skills, or devil fruits as you like, as long as you don't kill anyone. Zifa said. Are you sure? Warring States frowned. He knew Porisalano's strength and thought Zifa would restrict Porisalano from using the fruit's ability. Sure. Warring States' eyes flashed, nodded, and agreed with Zifa's decision. Okay, let's get started. Porisalano looked at the weapon behind Karen and said in a long tone. Oh, it's really scary. Chapter 41. Garp's eldest nephew. Marlin Fenduo, training ground. Under the sunlight, the dust was flying, as if there was an invisible pressure. Under the nervous and solemn gaze of all Marines, Karen and Porisalano stood opposite each other. Karen held the Tibetan feng tightly in his hand, sweat dripping from his forehead due to nervousness, and his heartbeat accelerated rapidly, as if it was about to break through his chest. This was the first time Karen faced a general-level opponent, and the sense of oppression Porisalano brought to Karen was unique. Even the Marines who dared to look were infected by Karen's emotions, and looked at the scene that was going to happen next with their eyes wide open. Lieutenant General Porisalano is so strong, you can feel his oppression just by standing there without moving. That's right, Lieutenant General Porisalano is a user with the power of the shining fruit, which is the powerful Logia fruit. The Marine on the other side is hardly a match for Porisalano. He's equally good. I heard that Lieutenant General Porisalano is already a candidate for general. The Marines looked at Porisalano with admiring eyes and started talking about it. Karen took a deep breath and tried to calm down. Thinking back to the past 3 months of training, his eyes were burning with a strong fighting spirit, as if he was about to set the entire school on fire. Compared to Karen, who looked like he was facing a formidable enemy, Porisalano looked much more relaxed. His face was confident and calm, and the corners of his mouth were slightly raised with a faint smile. It's really troublesome, Junior Karen, you should take action first. Their eyes met. Karen said solemnly, okay, be careful. As he spoke, Zhang Feng was raised and fell cleanly. As soon as he takes action, he is ready to use a special move, although there is a high probability that it will not work. Look at the sword. The one sword immortal kneels down, and with the blessing of the power of law, Porisalano is no exception. The next moment, Porisalano suddenly appeared under Karen's sword. He also knelt down on one knee, raised his hands high, and clamped Karen's sword. This funny scene made everyone's eyes widen. Warring States' eyes flashed, and he said in a deep voice to Zifa, is this the power of Karen's word fruit? Even Porisalano can't resist it. Yes, his ability is very strange. Even my weapon colors are useless. Zifa recalled the day he and Karen fought, and he was also confused. It's a pity that when he uses this ability, he doesn't seem to be able to move. Garp stuffed a handful of senbei and smiled with interest. Can you even control yourself? It's really useless for fighting. Are you going to starve the opponent to death like this? Crane's eyes also shone with light. He looked at Garp and said angrily, weak ribs? What if this power can control Whitebeard, control you? Like you said, it wouldn't be difficult to starve you to death. Garp put down the senbei in his hand and couldn't help laughing. Warring States, what do you think? Zifa said in a deep voice. An experiment is needed. If this power can really control Whitebeard, then this little guy will be of great significance to Marine. Thinking of Whitebeard kneeling before Karen and Marine, Sengoku's expression became uncontrollably aroused. No, I read that right. Porisalano actually knelt under Karen's sword. How is that possible? That's Porisalano. Marine, who was watching the battle, opened his mouth wide and took a deep breath. Porisalano's expression changed. He had not expected such a change. Hey, it's fake. It turns out you are also a devil fruit user. It's too scary. As he spoke, his body suddenly turned into a ball of yellow flash, and appeared behind Karen again, with one leg raised high. Have you ever been kicked by a light? The shadow of death instantly enveloped Karen's body, and before Karen could turn around, he ducked and flew away. Boom! A huge pothole appeared at Karen's original location, causing a cloud of dust to fly. Karen's face became ugly. Is this the strength of a general? The speed is too fast, not at the same level at all. However, Karen did not panic. After all, this was just a trial, and Porisalano would not really kill him. If it were a real battle, it was not certain whether he could dodge the blow just now. With his thoughts at this point, Karen relaxed his mind. Since his opponent did not dare to make a killing move and he knew that he was no match for Porisalino, he would no longer hold back and put everything he had learned these days into full play. Standing up and looking at Porisalino, who looked indifferent, Karen said in a deep voice. "Lieutenant General Porisalino, I know that I am no match for you. This is my strongest attack. I have never used it myself, so be careful." No longer hesitating, a dazzling light flashed from the tip of Zhang Feng's sword, and the vigorous sword intent slowly condensed in the air like substance, carrying unparalleled pressure. Karen held the hilt of the sword tightly, took a deep breath, and then shouted. X-Curry Stick. This is the secret skill that Karen has learned in the past few months, using sword energy to condense the tip of the sword, and then burst out suddenly. When he called out this name, he activated his unparalleled skills, and the terrifying sword power tripled. The only drawback is that his sword intention cannot condense the weapon color, so it only looks very powerful, but it does not have much lethality against Logia. So he dared to use it on Porisalino boldly. The dazzling light struck from top to bottom towards Porisalino. Porisalino's mouth twitched slightly. "Are you kidding me? You can also light up? It's really scary." With a flash of light, the ground seemed to be torn apart, revealing a deep crack. The crack was like a ferocious beast, stretching into the distance with its fangs and claws, as if it was about to tear the entire school grounds in half. The broad cloak of justice flew up, and Porisalino's figure was submerged in the dazzling light. Smoke and dust rose everywhere and filled the air, making people suffocate. The surrounding Marines looked at this scene in horror, their faces full of shock and fear. Is he really a recruit? It's horrible. What a terrifying sword intent. Is this the elite of the elite? Jun stood aside, his eyes flashing with surprise and excitement, the corners of his mouth raised slightly, and an uncontrollable smile gradually unfolded. She had seen Karen develop this move before, but never thought it would be so terrifying. He murmured, "Good boy, you've tricked me. He's only 17 years old." Seeing this terrifying blow, Warring States stood up in shock. "This kid has the same demeanor as I did back then." Garp opened his mouth wide and coughed lightly. "Ahem, he is indeed my Garp's eldest nephew." Chapter 42. Position. Zifa looked at Garp, smiled and cursed, "You old bastard, when did Karen become your eldest nephew?" Garp pursed his lips and muttered, "Karen was introduced by Darag, so he is naturally my eldest nephew." Zifa smiled silently, without comment. The dust slowly dispersed, revealing the original appearance of the school grounds. At this time, Karen was lying on the ground helplessly, as if her strength had been drained instantly. This move is very powerful, and its subsequent effect is that after using it, he will lose all his strength. If it weren't for the school field, he wouldn't have used this trick at all. It seems that we need to improve it in the future, and try to use it with less effort. Karen stared at the sky blankly, summarizing his experience in his mind. It was really scary. I almost died. Porisalino didn't know when he appeared beside Karen, pouting and looking at Karen with admiration. Although he almost died as he spoke, judging from his calm movements, he didn't put in much effort. A laser slowly condensed from his fingertips, becoming brighter and brighter in Karen's pupils. "I give up." Karen quickly interrupted. After sending that blow, he no longer had any extra strength. Porisalino flattened his mouth in disappointment, and the laser light gathered on his fingertips slowly dissipated. As Karen shouted to admit defeat, a beautiful figure flew from the side and stretched out her hand to help Karen up from the ground. "It's Jun." Her expression was one of excitement and excitement. "Congratulations." Karen stood up straight and also smiled bitterly at Jun. "It's a little early to congratulate now, look at them." As he spoke, he turned his attention to Sengoku and Garp, who were watching the battle from a distance. "They are the ones who decide their own destiny. Ha ha ha, with that blow just now, you are now at least the level of a major general. Why don't they let you go?" Jun is obviously very confident and does not care about the results announced next. Karen nodded and was about to say something when a systematic prompt in his mind interrupted him. "Congratulations to host for achieving the goal and getting a lucky draw opportunity. Do you want to draw now?" Karen made a decision in his mind. The reputation system was too mysterious. He wasn't sure what he would draw, so he planned to find a place where no one would draw the lottery. Ahem. Warring States stood up, interrupted Karen's musings, walked slowly towards Karen, and asked in a deep voice, "How are you? Are you injured?" Karen covered her stomach and replied sheepishly, "A little hungry." "Ha ha ha, you are indeed Garp's eldest nephew. I will let you go to dinner when the announcement is over." Warring States patted Karen on the shoulder and joked. "Little Garp's eldest nephew." Jun opened his mouth wide and looked at Karen in confusion as if he had heard a huge secret. "Ah? What?" Karen also looked confused. So Sengoku described what Garp had just said to Karen. Karen smiled in her heart, she didn't expect that she would become One Piece's uncle. What would happen if Luffy was raised as a marine? And poor Gas Ace. Karen tried hard not to laugh when she thought of Wang Luffy shouting that he wanted to be the Marine King's man. Alas, should I give in when I meet Luffy in the future? Karen thought distressedly. Unknowingly, he turned his attention to Porisalino who was standing aside. Porisalino smiled at Karen. Catching Porisalino's gaze, Karen came back to her senses, feeling as if she had been caught copying homework, and smiled awkwardly at Porisalino. "Haha, this is your first time meeting Porisalino. He is also Zifa's student like you." Sengoku noticed Karen's gaze and introduced him to Karen. "Senior Porisalino is very strong, I am no match for him. This is the benefit of being a student of Zifa. In the Marine camp, any Marine high-level person has a relationship with Zifa. Haha, you are not belittling yourself. How old you are? I believe you will be able to surpass Porisalino in the future." Warring States laughed. "Did I pass the assessment?" Karen rubbed the back of his head. "This." Warring States suppressed his smile and pondered. "Hey, you saw Karen's strength just now. He definitely has the strength to go to sea alone." Seeing that Sengoku didn't answer, Jun couldn't help but speak up to help Karen. "Jun." Crane, Zifa and Garp also came over. She scowled slightly and admonished, "Sengoku Agent Fleet Admiral, he has his own considerations." Jun stopped talking and just looked at Sengoku. Warring States felt uncomfortable being stared at. He coughed slightly and asked Porisalino, "You just fought against Karen. What do you think?" Porisalino, who was standing aside looking bored, froze his smile and said slowly, "I think since Karen is Mr. Zifa's student, Mr. Zifa must have made arrangements." What an old fox! The level of blame shifting is really high. When Warring States heard Porisalino's innocent answer, he cursed in his heart, then turned his attention to Zifa and asked. "Haha, Zifa, what do you think? I'm just Karen's teacher. Whether he passes today or not is your decision." Zifa looked up at the sky and took out his ears, not caring about Kaido. "Hey, is there anything to consider? I think Karen passed." Garp on the side looked at Karen with satisfaction and shouted loudly. Sengoku touched his beard with a headache, glanced at Garp fiercely, and then asked he. "Zaya, what do you think?" Hearing Sengoku ask Crane's opinion, Jun stared at Crane with wide eyes. Crane seemed not to have noticed Jun's gaze. He lowered his head and pondered for a moment, with a hint of wisdom shining in his eyes. "I think it's past." Jun let out a long breath, and the smile on his face could no longer be suppressed. A look of astonishment appeared on Zenguo's face, and then he laughed out loud. Sengoku didn't consider what Garp thought, but since he chose to pass, as Marine's General Staff Officer, Sengoku chose to trust his judgment. There were 3 votes in total, and 2 people chose to pass, so he no longer hesitated. "Okay, I declare that I agree with Karen to pass the graduation examination." With the announcement of the Warring States period, everything fell into place. Jun approached Karen, rolled his eyes at Karen, and whispered, "Hee, look, you will definitely be able to pass what I am saying." "Thank you." Karen whispered her thanks with her heart in her stomach. Then he gave a military salute to Warring States. Zifa stared at Karen with a complicated expression, and then smiled, "Okay. Teacher." Karen's eyes were a little red for some reason. Zifa stretched out his hand and beat Karen's chest, with a proud tone, "You are worthy of being my student, Zifa." Then, he spread his hand, pointed it at Warring States, and said with a smile, "Bring it." "What?" Warring States looked stunned. Zifa looked unkind and said in a deep voice. Karen's promoted position. Chapter 43. Big Buddha Shockwave. Warring States shook his head helplessly and said to Zifa. "You don't think I would carry a seal with me? Humph, then I don't care." Since you are asked to evaluate Karen's strength, you must be prepared. Zifa was like a scoundrel, and he did not take back his outstretched hand. Warring States put Zifa's hand down and said angrily, "Okay, when I get back, we can discuss what position is better for Karen. Why do you need to go back to discuss it? It just so happens that he and Garp are here, and there are so many lieutenant generals and major generals nearby. It would be better to just discuss it here." Zifa took out a cigar from his arms and lit it. "Here." Warring States frowned, looked around, pondered for a moment, and nodded. "Okay, let's follow the highest configuration of previous years. Lieutenant Colonel of the headquarters, how about it? There are a total of the following grades in Marine: General, Lieutenant General, Major General, Brigadier General, Colonel, Lieutenant Colonel, Major, Captain, Lieutenant Junior Grade, Ensign. Those above the rank of Lieutenant can wear the coat of justice." "No, I object." Garp, who was eating senbei on the side, suddenly spoke up and shouted, "Since Karen has the strength of a Major General, then he should be assigned the position of Major General." As expected of Garp, he placed Karen on the rank of Major General as soon as he spoke, jumping 3 levels in a row compared to the position given by Sengoku. You must know that even Jun, who has joined Marine for so many years, is only a Major General now. Warring States' head was full of black lines, and he held Garp's collar. "Asshole! Don't you think about how old Karen is? He was promoted to Major General without even making any achievements. Who can convince him? Oh, really, who is dissatisfied?" Zifa stood up and blew out a mouthful of white smoke. At this moment, Karen felt the confidence of having a backstage and felt Luffy's happiness. "Why are you messing around too?" Warring States let go of his hand and looked at Zifa angrily. Zifa glanced at Karen. After all, he was not as thick-skinned as Garp, and suggested, "Ahem, you are right. Although Karen is very good, he has not made any meritorious service. So let's arrange him to be a Brigadier General first, and then he will be promoted after he has made meritorious service." "No." Warring States interrupted Zifa's proposal, turned to look at Porisalino, and asked, "What position will you have after graduation?" Porisalino didn't expect to have his own affairs. He thought for a moment and said slowly, "It must be the Colonel of the headquarters." Warring States nodded and said to Karen, "In that case, let's become Colonel." Seeing what Zifa wanted to say, he added, "After you have made great achievements, I will immediately arrange for you to be promoted to Brigadier General." Zifa opened his mouth, but no shameless words came out. "Okay." Karen stood up straight and thanked, "Thank you. You don't need to thank me, just thank them if you want." Warring States stroked his beard and said helplessly. Karen's face straightened, and he bowed deeply to Zifa, Garp, and Crane. Zifa nodded happily and stretched out his hand to Warring States again. Warring States looked at the familiar big hand and said solemnly, "I said I would wait until I get back before I can approve the official appointment." "Haha, I know. Then you still..." Zifa's face turned red with a rare expression, showing a hint of embarrassment, and said shyly, "I remember, there is a reward for every first place in graduation." "Yes, but I remember that this year's reward has been given to you, right?" Warring States said suspiciously. "Yes, I gave it, but you also know that Karen is a devil fruit user." Zifa said. "I know, so what?" Warring States said. Zifa explained, "A person can only eat a devil fruit once, so I can't give him the smoke fruit." Karen was moved when she heard this. It turned out that this is how Smoker got the smoke fruit. Also, the 3 future Marine generals will all be Logia. Maybe this is a reward given to them by Marine. However, as a Logia, I just don't know why Smoker's performance in the future will be so awkward. Warring States rolled his eyes and said expressionlessly, "Oh, so, now that he has eaten the devil fruit, I have nothing to reward him." Zifa laughed loudly, set his sights on Porisalino, and asked in a low voice, "I remember Porisalino was protecting Vegapunk, right?" Warring States had a guess in his heart and said in a deep voice, "What do you want to do?" "Haha, I heard that Vegapunk has developed a technology that allows weapons to eat devil fruits, right?" As he spoke, Zifa pointed at Zhang Feng behind Karen. "You want Karen's weapon to eat the smoke fruit?" Sengoku frowned. "Yes, so I want Karen to follow Porisalino to Aegean Island to find Vegapunk and see if it can be completed." Zifa nodded. Sengoku looked thoughtfully at Porosalino and asked, "Does Vegapunk have this technology?" As Vegapunk's bodyguard, Porosalino knows many secrets, but some secrets belong to the world government and he cannot reveal too many. However, this technology is already in a semi-announced state, otherwise Zifa would not know about it. There was a hint of hesitation on Porosalino's face, and he hesitated, "This. I seem to remember." Sengoku was thoughtful and said to Karen, "How about it? Do you want your weapon to eat devil fruit? Let Zhang Feng eat the devil fruit?" Karen thought of Spondam's weapon in the plot Vangfried, which ate the elephant fruit and took the form of an elephant. His weapon can transform into a giant elephant. If there is a suitable fruit, it may not be impossible for Zhang Feng to eat it. And you can also meet the most powerful scientists in one piece, so it's not a bad idea. But he remembered that weapons can only eat animal devil fruits. Putting aside the doubts in his heart, Karen nodded, "If there is a suitable fruit, I am willing." "He can't eat smoke fruits," Porosalino suddenly said, and then explained in Zifa's confused eyes, "Weapons can only eat animal devil fruits." Zifa was stunned, he really didn't know this information. Warring States rubbed his temples and said with a headache, "That's it, okay, let me ask you." Zifa's eyes lit up and he said with a smile, "Okay, but the animal type can't be too bad. It should be a fantasy beast type anyway." Warring State's eyes darkened, and he couldn't bear it anymore. He glared at Zifa angrily, "Asshole, don't go too far." Zifa raised his eyebrows and muttered loudly, "I don't care about that. Logia originally corresponds to the phantom beast species. Okay, give me your smoke fruit, and I'll give you a phantom beast species." Warring States stretched out his hand to suppress his anger. Zifa grinned, "Hey, don't be so stingy. There's no reason to spit out the fruit you sent to the military academy. The smoke fruit is not given to anyone. I will help him find a good owner." Warring States looked at the shameless Zifa and couldn't bear it. Big Buddha Shockwave. Chapter 44. Going to sea. The sky is high enough for birds to fly, and the sea is wide enough for fish to leap. Karen stood on the warship, looking at the rough sea, with great pride in her heart. This is the first time he has led a warship to sea. Compared with the last time he went to sea with Zifa, he has an extra sense of responsibility in his heart. Of course, more importantly, it also means that he is free. This is a small warship with a height of about 40 meters. The shape of the warship is no different from that of an ordinary marine warship. There are also 20 artillery pieces and 100 soldiers from the marine headquarters on the warship. 7 days had passed since the last battle against Porosalino, during which time Karen's graduation certificate and colonel's medal had been issued. As for letting Zhang Feng eat the devil fruit, Sengoku is still in contact and will need to wait for some time. Originally, Garp wanted Karen to be his adjutant and work under him, but Karen refused because he wanted to train alone. The goal of this trip to the sea is not the New World, but the East Blue Sea. He wants to go back to Srilly Town, pay homage to his dead relatives, and then bid farewell to the past completely. Is this also a homecoming? Karen thought in his heart, looked at the people who came to see him off at the port, and said, "Just send it here." "Ha ha ha, okay, although there are no pirates in the East Blue Sea that can threaten you, you should be careful." There was no expression on Zifa's face. He beat Karen's chest and warned. Karen smiled and nodded, "I will, teacher." "Hey, don't forget, you still owe me something." Tina gave Karen a vicious look. "I won't forget it. When I come back from the East Blue Sea, I will give you a good gift." Karen took out a cigarette from his pocket and lit it with the lighter given by Tina. "Karen, you can't just remember the women and forget the brothers." Rosinandi said with a smile, "I haven't been to the East Blue Sea yet. Remember to bring any interesting and delicious specialties." "Okay, definitely." Karen turned around and waved. Yang Fan, set sail. The warship began to move slowly. At this time, a beautiful figure poked its head out of the cabin. "Is that the marine you confessed your love to?" Jun pursed his lips to Tina, with a faint smile on his face. Karen looked at Jun with a headache, smiled awkwardly, and answered the question, "Why do you have to follow me to the East Blue Sea?" He did not expect that Jun would go to the East Blue Sea with him. According to Jun, she was arranged here by the Warring States period. It seemed that she was afraid that Karen had no experience in leading a team, so she asked Jun to take special care of her. As for why it was Jun, Karen didn't know. Hi, of course I have something to do when I go to the East Blue Sea. Jun raised his head and looked at the blue sky. Karen said helplessly, okay, if you say something happens, it will happen. Without giving Jun time to react, he turned around and walked towards the bow of the ship, letting out a long breath. Jun looked at Karen's back, and the smile on his face became even stronger. Karen stood on the bow of the ship, feeling the breath of the sea breeze. Because it was a temporarily assigned ship, he did not modify his bow like Garp did. Shaking his head, his mind moved, and he opened the system interface in his mind. Target reputation, 10186/100000. A Marine officer with a bright future. Get a chance to win a prize draw. He hasn't had any luck in the past 7 days, thinking about leaving Marinfendo and changing his luck, maybe he can get Sun blood? Thinking of this, Karen's face showed a hint of excitement. Looking around and seeing that no one was paying attention to him, Karen clicked the lottery button in his mind. Ding, congratulations to host for getting the skill, Foodie. Oh, no. My Sun blood, my swordsmanship, my Sherinon. Although it was expected that the system would not appear anything too heaven-defying, Karen still couldn't help feeling a little distressed when she saw the skill she had drawn. Foodie? What is this? Do you want me to change my career to be a cook? You must know that in One Piece, in this world where everyone has a huge appetite, being a cook is definitely the most tiring profession. Wait, why are there no instructions for use? Isn't this just a title? So the goal I worked so hard to achieve is just a reward? Seeing the system adding another 0 at the end, Karen was heartbroken. Or? Try it? Karen thought in her heart, this is a system product after all. Speaking of which, he has never cooked before coming to this world. Firstly, he has been in Marine Military Academy since he was born in this world and has no chance. Secondly, as a member of a big foodie empire, Karen has always been ashamed. My cooking skills are not very good. Now that he has left Marinfendo, he also needs to hunt some Poseidon-type reserve ingredients. With this in mind, Karen turned and walked towards the kitchen. The kitchen is very big. After all, there are about 100 people on the ship and there are so many mouths. It is almost noon and it is time to prepare lunch. Colonel. With Karen's arrival, the busy chefs saluted Karen one after another. His eyes were full of curiosity and wonder. What a young colonel! As Marines from the Marine headquarters, they had heard more or less tidbits about Karen, but they had never met Karen himself. Therefore, there is a desire for knowledge and exploration on their faces. Karen coughed lightly and asked, "It's okay, I'll just come over and look around. You can do whatever you need to do. By the way, who is the person in charge here?" At this time, a tall man wearing a white chef's hat trotted up to Karen. "Sir, I am the person in charge here. May I have your name?" "My name is Saxton." "Oh, prepare some kitchen utensils and seasonings and send them to my room." After all, Karen was embarrassed to show off his poor cooking skills here. "Ah? Okay, sir." Saxton was stunned for a moment, then nodded in agreement. Every powerful person always has some quirks. Although Saxton is confused, he understands. Karen looked at the busy chef and asked. "Well, by the way, what ingredients are we preparing?" Saxton said, "It's all fresh fish, fruits and vegetables." After a pause, he added, "Because we are on the sea, there is no shortage of fresh fish, but there is only a month's supply of fruits and vegetables. So, we have to find an island to replenish food within a month." Karen pondered for a moment and asked. "Are there any Poseidon-like ingredients?" In Marinfendo, because of the return of life, Karen's 3 meals a day are Poseidon. Eating Poseidon can strengthen his body. Saxton was stunned, sweat dripping from his forehead. "Well, no, because Poseidon-like ingredients are too expensive." Karen nodded slightly, thoughtfully, and asked. "So are there any Poseidon species in the waters near here?" Chapter 45. Poseidon class. This. Sweat fell from Saxton's face, and he stammered, "There should be." When going sailing, most warships would avoid the Poseidon class. He did not expect that the young colonel in front of him would actually want to take the initiative to cause trouble for the Poseidon class. You must know that in the sea, apart from the unpredictable weather, the most dangerous thing is encountering Poseidon species. The reason why some ships add sea stones to the bottom of their ships is because this can effectively confuse the Poseidon class, making them think that the ship is the sea, thereby avoiding being entangled by the Poseidon class. Karen's eyes narrowed slightly, and he saw the reason why Saxton didn't want him to find Poseidon, and then smiled. Haha, you don't know, right? Major General Jun is also on the ship. With her here, are you still afraid of a mere Poseidon? Ah? Is Major General Jun also on board? Saxton wiped the sweat from his face and exhaled a long breath. Hi, there is, it's not far away. He seemed to recognize Jun's strength very much. When he heard that Jun was on the ship, he stopped being secretive and directly told Karen the location of the Poseidon class. Okay, I understand, then you can get busy. After understanding this, Karen turned and left. Boom! A huge figure suddenly broke out of the water, setting off turbulent waves. It was a Poseidon that resembled a sea snake. It raised its head, revealing its sharp fangs and fierce eyes, which made people shudder. The scales on its body shone with a cold light under the sun. Against its background, the warship looks like a half-grown child. It's the Poseidon class. Run quickly, why did you provoke a Poseidon? Hurry and ask for Major General Jun. Horror! The moment the Poseidon class appeared, all the sailors had expressions of fear and despair on their faces. Fortunately, their duty as soldiers did not make them turn around and run away. Come, Colonel. A Marine soldier standing next to Karen looked at the muzzle of the gun that was still filled with smoke that had not dissipated. Big beads of sweat continued to fall from his forehead. His face was full of panic, and his legs could not stop. Trembled. Just now, when Karen found him and asked him to bombard the huge black shadow on the water, he felt something was wrong. Although in the animation, the Poseidon class does not look threatening, in fact, there are strong and weak Poseidon classes, and the weak ones include small Poseidon classes like the King of the Offshore. There are also giant Poseidons like the Fishman Island summoned by Shirahoshi, which are as high as 5,000 meters. Karen stared at the giant Poseidon, with a strong fighting spirit in his eyes. He reached out and patted the nervous soldier on the shoulder, and said calmly, "It's okay, it's just a Poseidon." Looking at Karen calmly, the soldier was also infected by his emotions, and even stopped his trembling legs. Roar! There was a huge roar, accompanied by howling winds and huge waves. The soldier's legs, which he had managed to stop, softened, and he sat down heavily on the ground. He murmured, "It's over, it's over." Karen looked at this scene speechlessly, but he understood. Even when he looked at the Poseidon that was dozens of times taller than him, he felt a little frightened in his heart. "Colonel, there is a small submarine under the warship. You should retreat first." Under Karen's surprised gaze, the soldier with weak legs struggled to get up from the ground. His legs were still trembling, but his eyes were firm. Meeting his gaze, Karen felt an indescribable sense of responsibility in her heart. These are his soldiers, and he is responsible for them. The lives and future of these soldiers depend on him. Compared with the sailors who are reduced to backgrounds in the plot, these people are more real. Karen pulled out the hidden sword behind him, took a deep look at the soldiers preparing to fight, turned to look at the Poseidons, and said solemnly, "Poseidons are nothing to be afraid of, leave it to me." As he spoke, he casually struck out with his sword, and a sharp sword energy struck at the sea snake like lightning. Boom! The huge and terrifying sword light fell hard on the sea snake's body, and the huge sea snake roared to the sky in pain. A jet black aura gradually spread from Karen's arm until it reached Zhang Feng's sword, making the originally dark Zhang Feng deeper and darker. Zhang Feng's sword trembled slightly, as if responding to Karen's fighting spirit, and Karen's eyes became sharp. Good guy. A good horse is paired with a good saddle, a sword is paired with a hero, and Zhang Feng, who has been dormant for 3 years, reveals its fangs at this moment. Karen stepped on the moonwalk and flew away. He raised his Zhang Feng high and struck the sea snake with a fierce sword light. God avoids. Rumble. The powerful and heavy blow made the entire sea tremble, and the sea snake also felt uncomfortable. Blood flew from his body, and soon dyed the originally blue sea red. Who is that? It seems to be Colonel Cullen. The colonel is so powerful. He can even hurt Poseidons. The marine soldiers who were originally in a hurry stopped what they were doing and stared blankly at Karen, who looked like a god of war. They were filled with admiration and could not help but praise him repeatedly. It was trembling in pain, glaring fiercely at the tiny Karen. Its huge body shook suddenly, and its long tail quickly turned into a sharp whip like lightning, and with the sound of piercing the air, it struck hard at Karen. Pull it away hard. A trace of surprise flashed in Karen's eyes. He didn't expect this big guy to be so fast. Wherever the tail passed, the air was sucked out and made a sharp whistling sound, as if everything was to be torn apart. Karen's eyes narrowed slightly, deliberately testing the strength of his body, but he didn't hide and protected his head with both arms. Iron block and golden bell. A terrifying force was thrust at Karen, and his body flew backwards and was knocked down into the sea. His body was like a stone thrown by someone, rising and falling on the sea like a water float, setting off waves. This guy really forgot all what teacher Zifa said. Jun, who was watching on the sidelines, shook his head with a headache and was about to rush towards Karen as soon as he moved. She knew that Karen was a devil fruit user and would lose the ability to fight once he fell into the sea. Suddenly, with a swish sound, a black shadow shot out from the water. Under the astonished gazes of Jun and the marine soldiers, Karen used the moonwalk plus shave and stood in the air again. He shook his dizzy head and shook the water stains on his clothes. Karen was secretly happy. After the test just now, he found that his body was terrifying. It looked dangerous just now, but in fact he didn't suffer any damage except that his head was dizzy. The reason why he flew upside down was because he had no stress points in the air. The giant sea snake looked at Karen, who reappeared in the sky with deep hatred in his eyes. Suddenly, it extended its huge head into the sea water and raised its head again. His body became even larger than before. Karen narrowed his eyes slightly and carefully observed the sea snake's actions, cold sweat falling from his forehead. Not good. Chapter 46. Little Snake. He saw the sea snake's intention and saw that he could not defeat Karen, but it actually wanted to flood the warship. Karen really didn't expect Poseidons to have such an IQ, but that's right. After all, Poseidons generally have long lifespans, so it's not surprising that they can give birth to intelligence. A cold light flashed in Karen's eyes, and he no longer hesitated. He hid the sword in his hand, and the huge sword energy struck like lightning in the abyss of the sea snake. A series of hideous scars appeared on the mouth of the sea snake. It whimpered and did not let go. Instead, it turned its huge head and opened its bloody mouth to spray the seawater in its mouth onto the warship. Buzz! A sword light larger than before condensed on the tip of Zhang Feng's sword, and the terrifying sword intent caused bursts of roars in the air. X-curry stick. In desperation, Karen had no choice but to use his strongest blow. Wherever the sword energy passed, the air seemed to be torn apart, making a sharp whistling sound and striking the huge sea snake with astonishing power. On the body. In an instant, the sea snake's huge body suffered heavy damage and fell to the ground, causing a huge wave. As the sea snake fell, its body set off a turbulent wave in the sea water. The huge waves spread in all directions, forming a spectacular wall of water. The waves hit everything around, and the splashes fell like raindrops. There was no time to sigh at Karen's strength. Under the wash of the waves, the swaying warship was in danger in the face of the huge waves. The marines on the warship grabbed whatever they could. After a long time, the sea finally calmed down, and now it was scarlet red. Is this the strength of our colonel? No, I have met a colonel from the headquarters before. He does not have this kind of strength. The scary one is Colonel Cullen. So awesome, Colonel Cullen is invincible. The marine soldiers opened their mouths wide and were silent for a moment, then a fierce cheer broke out on the ship. The eyes they looked at Karen became more awe-inspiring. For powerful people, they would not lack followers. Karen stood on the bow of the boat, comparing the weakness he felt the last time he used an X-curry stick. Although he was equally weak this time, it was much better than last time. At least he could still stand and move around. He helped the marine soldier who was knocked down by the waves and said calmly, "Are you okay?" This soldier was the one who asked Karen to retreat earlier. He looked at Karen blankly. Then he regained his composure, stood in a standard military posture, and shouted excitedly. "I'm fine, Colonel." Karen nodded, took out a pack of cigarettes from his arms, stretched out his lighter, and tried several times, but couldn't light it. I looked down and saw that the cigarette and lighter had been soaked by the sea water. I sighed helplessly and put the cigarette and lighter back into my pocket. Seeing this, the soldier who was helped up by Karen stretched out his trembling hands and groped in his pocket for a while, and also took out the cigarette case that was soaked in sea water. He smiled awkwardly at Karen and put the cigarette he touched back into his pocket. "May I have your name?" Karen looked at the slightly embarrassed soldier and asked suddenly. The soldier was stunned, gave Karen a military salute, and said hurriedly. Jesse, Habakok Jesse, sir. I am the helmsman and gunner on this ship." Karen nodded, patted Jesse on the shoulder, and said calmly, "Well, good, I remember it." A blush instantly appeared on Jesse's face, whether it was nervousness, excitement, or both. "Jesse, organize some people to fish out this giant snake," said Karen, looking at the body of the giant snake, comparing the size of the warship, and touching his nose. I mean to find a chef who will be able to eat it. Parts and useful parts are preserved." "Yes, sir." Looking at Jesse, who was extremely excited, Karen added. "Well, also, remember to send an edible part to my lounge." "Understood, sir." After watching Jesse leave, Karen stretched his body lazily and stood on the bow of the boat. He wanted to enjoy the sea breeze for a while, but was dissuaded by the smell of blood. Then, under the respectful eyes of the sailors, he slowly returned to the lounge. As the highest-ranking officer on the ship, his rest room is large, with 2 bedrooms, a separate bathroom, and even a kitchen. "You were very powerful just now." As soon as I returned to the room, a lazy voice came from the living room. It was Jun. Karen was not surprised that Jun appeared here, because Jun disliked the other rooms as being too bad, and there happened to be 2 bedrooms here, so they lived together temporarily. "My hands are itchy for a moment." Karen touched her nose and looked at Jun sitting on the sofa. From his perspective, as Jun spoke, the whiteness of her chest rose and fell, constantly teasing Karen's optic nerves. Turning around awkwardly, under Jun's surprised gaze, he began to take off his clothes one by one. "What are you doing?" Jun looked at Karen coldly, his expression not very good. Karen casually put the coat he took off into the washing machine and said angrily. "Of course I'm washing clothes. After all, my clothes are wet after fighting with the sea snake for so long." After saying that, he took off his pants again, leaving only a pair of underwear all over his body. He paused and said maliciously and provocatively. "Hehe, let me just say, look, it will definitely be awkward for men and women to live in the same room. You can still change rooms now." Jun stared blankly at Karen's movements, thoughtfully, then suddenly stood up and walked out the door. Karen let out a long breath. Although Jun is very beautiful, living with her is very pleasing to the eye. Karen also likes to see. But after all, they don't have a particularly close relationship, and Karen has quite a secret. There is no shortage of beauties in this world. In Karen's heart, he still feels that everything in this world is based on strength. Only if the strength is strong enough, no woman can be found. However, seeing that Jun was about to open the door and leave, he felt an uncontrollable sense of loss in his heart. Jun gave Karen a hard look, pushed the gate of opening, an imperceptible smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and then, under Karen's astonished gaze, he quickly turned around and hooked his arm around Karen's neck. She opened her mouth, moved close to Karen's ear, and opened her red lips slightly, accompanied by a sense of warmth. "Little brother, your hair hasn't even grown yet, so don't think about this, right?" Karen didn't expect that Jun would suddenly attack him. The faint fragrance penetrated his nostrils, and his ears were wrapped in heat waves. He turned his head stiffly. When their eyes met, Karen saw the teasing and subtle shyness in Jun's eyes. Karen's Adam's apple rolled uncontrollably, and he swallowed. Suddenly, he reached out and grabbed Jun's snow-white arm, and his voice was trembling. Jun, sister, if you do this, I will commit a crime." "Yes, really." Jun's eyes were a little flustered when Karen grabbed her arm, and then she pretended to be calm. "Do you dare?" The next moment, Jun's mouth was tightly blocked, and she felt like a flexible little snake was constantly exploring something in her mouth. She widened her eyes, not expecting things to develop like this. She wanted to push Karen, but found that she was completely powerless. She tried to resist the attack of the little snake with her tongue, and the 2 little snakes kept entangled in her mouth. Gradually, she became confused and her head became empty. Chapter 47. What the hell is this rice? Colonel. This is for you. Jesse was holding a large piece of sea snake meat in his hand and was speechless as he looked at the two people kissing each other. As expected of a colonel, even Major General Jun was conquered. As Jessie spoke out, Jun also came to her senses, and her body strength gradually recovered. She hurriedly pushed Karen away, glared at Karen fiercely, and wanted to go out, but found that Jessie was watching at a loss. She gritted her silver teeth, turned around and ran towards the bedroom. Ahem, Karen stared blankly at Jun as he left, savoring the sweetness in his mouth, and said angrily to Jessie, "What's the matter?" Jessie came back to his senses and handed the snake meat in his hand to Karen with a tone of admiration. "Here are the ingredients you asked for." Karen looked at the snake meat and suddenly felt a little angry about why he wanted to test his ability today. "Well, okay, leave it to me." He put the snake meat into the kitchen and turned around again. Jessie had left. After closing the door, Karen sat on the sofa in a daze. The progress was so fast that he couldn't react for a moment. He stretched out his hand to light the cigarette, but then he realized that the cigarette had been soaked by seawater. With a squeak sound, the door was pushed open. Karen turned around and saw Jun sticking his head out of the bedroom, and then walked over with a calm expression. "Just now." Karen looked embarrassed and was about to say something when she was interrupted by Jun. "Nothing happened." Jun blinked his beautiful eyes, his eyes full of threats. "Nothing happened, right? I will be responsible for you." Karen shook her head, as if she didn't see the threatening look in Jun's eyes. Jun stretched out his hand and wanted to hook Karen's neck. Thinking of the scene just now, he retracted his outstretched arm. "How old are you and you are still responsible for me?" "Sister, I have experienced this kind of thing a lot. It's just for fun. Besides, don't you have a girlfriend? She's the female marine who sent you away." Her tone was calm, without any waves, but Karen could hear the happiness and taste in her tone. Karen shook her head again, and was about to explain Tina to Jun, but was interrupted by Jun again. "Okay, you stink so much, go wash up quickly." Jun used his nose to smell the fishy smell coming from Karen's body, then pinched his small nose and urged with a frown. "Good." Karen looked deeply into Jun's eyes, then turned and walked towards the bathroom. After Karen left, Jun sat down where Karen had been sitting before, his face turning red at a speed visible to the naked eye. Crash! Karen turned on the shower, and dense water droplets spread from the top of her head to her whole body. He stared at himself in the mirror with a bright smile on his lips. When Karen got dressed and left the shower room, he found Jun smiling alternately and sadly at the blank wall. "Ahem, what are you thinking about?" Karen interrupted Jun's thoughts. Jun was like a panicked rabbit. He was startled and stood up suddenly. You, why are you so fast?" Karen touched his nose and said helplessly, "Just take a shower, how slow can it be?" "Oh." Jun poured a glass of hot water for Karen and asked curiously, "What does that soldier want from you?" Karen took the hot water, took a sip, and said casually, "I asked him to prepare some ingredients for me." "Ingredients? What for? Can you cook?" Jun looked surprised. "Yes." Karen nodded and said in his heart, "It just doesn't taste good." Jun's eyes lit up. "I remember you said you wanted to treat me to dinner, right?" Karen put down the water glass in his hand and rolled his eyes. "I'll treat you to something." This is true. The reason why Karen and Jun have such a good relationship in the past few months also stems from the free meal card Zifa gave him. These days, he often eats with Jun in the cafeteria. Part of Karen's reputation comes from her own strength, and part of it comes from eating in the cafeteria. Karen hesitated and said, "Actually, what I cook is not delicious." "Then I don't care." Jun touched his stomach and pouted, "I'm hungry." Karen had never seen such a childish side of Jun before. "So cute, is this really Jun?" Seeing Karen, who was suddenly stunned on the spot, Jun also realized that his behavior was somewhat uncharacteristic. Her face straightened up and she showed her superior posture again. "If you go to cook now, consider it as compensation for my training for you in the past few days." Karen came to his senses again. He was already standing in front of the chopping board with a kitchen knife and an apron with a cat pattern on him. Looking at the snake meat in front of him, several techniques for handling snake meat suddenly appeared in Karen's mind. At the same time, hundreds of ways to make snake meat also appeared in his mind. Is this a foodie? So this is what this skill is like? This time, I really became a cook. Looking at the side dishes and condiments around him, Karen chose the simplest one. Karen organized her mind and started to get busy in an orderly manner according to the steps in her mind. After a while, the aroma from the pot filled the entire warship. What does this smell like? It smells great. Is it a new recipe developed by the chef? I'm hungry, gulu gulu. Along with this aroma, the stomachs of the Marines on the warship began to growl. At this time, Jun, who was waiting on the sofa, suddenly came back to his senses. Could this smell be the food cooked by Karen? Didn't you say you can't cook? Why does it smell so delicious? Even if he didn't eat it, Jun was sure that Karen's food would be particularly delicious. She was just a little hungry at first, but now her stomach started to growl non-stop. Meanwhile on the other side, Karen scooped out the prepared snake meat, and his skillful movements were like those of a master who has practiced them countless times. After covering the food, Karen took it out and put it in front of Jun. He looked nervously at Jun, who looked expectant. He didn't know why he was also a little nervous. He also smelled the fragrance that filled the air, but after all, this was his first time cooking in this world. Although he was very confident that the product produced by the system would be high quality, after all, it was a recipe from a previous life, and he didn't know how to match it. Not in line with Jun's taste. Can it be opened? Jun looked at the covered food and asked Karen expectantly. Only then did Karen realize that the prepared food was covered, and nodded apologetically to Jun. Sure. Hearing this, Jun stretched out his hand and slowly removed the hijab covering the food. Buzz! The moment the hijab was removed, a dazzling light shot into the sky from the plate. Jun was startled by the sudden beam of light, and sat there blankly, at a loss. Karen seemed to remember the familiar BGM in his ears, and he couldn't help but exclaimed. What the hell is this rice? Chapter 48. Drugging. The light beam only appeared for a moment and then disappeared. Jun looked at Karen blankly, rubbed his eyes, and said in disbelief. You saw it just now, right? It was not an illusion. Karen rubbed his head with a headache. This damn system actually used the recipe of the Chinese little master. He looked at Jun with a stiff smile on his face. Yes. Jun sniffed deeply with her nose, and the aroma of the food went straight to her Tianling Gai. She swallowed a mouthful of saliva and said uncertainly. Can this be eaten? Of course, please. Karen was a little hesitant. This was the recipe of the Chinese chef, and he didn't know what would happen if he ate it. But seeing the expectant expression on Jun's face, he finally agreed. He handed the knife and fork on the side to Jun and made a sign of please enjoy. Jun used a fork to fork a piece of meat. The smell of the food was stronger than before, and her stomach kept urging her to eat it quickly. Without any further hesitation, Jun put the meat into his mouth. Oh ah! Chi! A moaning sound that is endlessly imaginative, one after another. It was also accompanied by the sound of clothes being stretched open. Karen looked intently, her eyes straightened. The moment Jun swallowed the food in her mouth, the clothes on her chest suddenly opened, revealing a touch of snow-white skin. The towering breasts were looming, as if they were precious treasures hidden under the clothes. It makes people want to play with it carefully. This alluring sight makes people imagine the soft touch and voluptuous curves. Karen's eyes widened. Is this a burst of clothing? Looking at the gradually blurred Jun, Karen swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Are you okay? The moment Karen asked, Jun, who slowly closed his eyes, suddenly murmured. Ah, this rich flavor is incredible. First of all, it's the taste of the sea. The rich sauce is sweeping in like a wave. It's so good that it's really indescribable. If you want to compare it, it's like the deep sea dragon swimming in the sea. Appeared, and sure enough, there will be such a review link. Karen had already expected it from the moment the food started to shine. Looking at Jun, who kept twisting his body, his hanging heart finally died. TNND. He knew foodies wouldn't be that simple. However, it looks really delicious. So big, so white, and seems to have some elasticity. At this time, Jun didn't care at all about his unintentional exposure. He forked another piece of meat, tasting it and commenting on it as if no one was watching. Until half a minute later, her body suddenly stiffened, she slowly pulled out the fork in her mouth, and looked at her snow-white chest. In Karen's disappointed eyes, she quickly covered her chest. At this moment, she was filled with grief and anger. You, despicable, I misjudged you and actually drugged me. As he spoke, he took out the jinpai lao in his hand and placed it on Karen's throat like lightning. The cold sweat on Karen's face suddenly fell down. Feeling the chill coming from his throat, he said with a wry smile. Sister Jun, please listen to my explanation. Halfway through, Karen looked at Jun with some embarrassment, not knowing what to say for a while. Say it. Jun stared at Karen coldly, his eyes full of disappointment in Karen. I don't know what to say, but I definitely didn't drug you, and I don't know why this happened. Think about it, am I the kind of person who knows how to take drugs? Jun thought for a while and realized that Karen was indeed not this kind of person, so he slowly took back the jinpira in his hand and said suspiciously. Really not? Really not? Karen cut through the metal and cut the iron rod. Jun sat down again, looking at the food on the table in a daze. Could it be that it's because this is snake meat? Snakes are inherently lustful and they behave like this because they ate this plate of meat. The more she thought about it, the more likely it became. Suddenly, she stood up suddenly and asked Karen. No, if it's really this snake meat, then wouldn't the soldiers on the warship be? Before she could finish speaking, a series of rapid footsteps came from outside the room. This is it. The smell comes from here. Hey! Don't go in, this seems to be Colonel Cullen's room. Dong dong dong! There was a rapid knock on the door. Karen and Jun looked at each other, watching Jun sorting out the clothes on his chest. Karen opened the door. When he opened the door, to Karen's surprise, the person who came was Saxton, the chef on the warship. At this time, a group of people were following behind him, with an intoxicated expression on his face. What's the matter? You're so worried. Did you smell a strange fragrance? Saxton shouted anxiously, completely forgetting Karen's identity. Is this what you're talking about? Jun pointed to the snake meat in front of the table. Saxton looked at Jun. Although he was a little surprised as to why Jun was here, the next moment his eyes were attracted to the snake meat on the table. Yes, that's what it tastes like. He shouted excitedly and actually stretched out his hand to taste it. Chef Saxton! An angry shout interrupted Saxton's movements, and it was Jessie who spoke. Don't forget where this is. Saxton was startled and raised his head blankly. When he saw everyone in the room clearly, cold sweat instantly wet his body. Colonel Cullen. Karen's face was neither happy nor sad, and he nodded calmly. Come, Colonel, please listen to my explanation. This is how it is. After I finished cooking, I suddenly smelled a strong aroma of rice in the kitchen. The aroma was so fragrant. I have never smelled such a fragrance in my life. I've been looking for the fragrant smell for a long time, and finally found it here. His explanation was incoherent, and he said whatever came to mind. Please, let me taste it. I can't eat such delicious food. I am ashamed to be a chef. At this point, he burst into tears like a child. Shut up! Karen shouted to stop him. Jun was thoughtful and suddenly asked. You said you had prepared the meal. Yes. Has anyone eaten it? Yes, if someone eats it, I will. Is there any special effect after eating it? Saxton touched the back of his head and said blankly. Ah? What special effects? Karen took Jun's words and explained. Ahem, it's like taking an aphrodisiac. No. He was a little surprised by Karen's question, but still answered truthfully. The eyes Jun looked at Karen gradually became dangerous again. Karen shuddered and pretended to be calm. This food is a bit strange, you'd better not eat it. Wow! As soon as he finished speaking, Saxton started crying again, and Karen had a headache seeing this scene. Stop! Stop crying! You can eat it, but let me remind you first that this food is really weird. I will not be responsible for any problems with it. When he heard that he could eat it, Saxton stopped crying again. It's okay, even if it's poison, I'll still take it. Chapter 49. Dance of Demons. Karen nodded, took out another set of knives and forks from the kitchen and handed it to Saxton. Saxton wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes. Under the expectant gazes of all Marines, he put the snake meat in front of his eyes and observed carefully. This shine, this softness, ah, perfection. This is real food. When it was finally ready to eat, Saxton was not in a hurry to taste it. He brought the food close to his nose and inhaled deeply. This scent, yes, that's what it smells like. Hey! Are you going to eat or not? A man standing outside the door also wearing a chef's hat urged. It was obvious that he was more anxious than Saxton. Saxton ignored him. At this moment, he seemed to be possessed by a demon, blocking all outside sounds. After looking at it carefully for a while, Saxton finally put the food into his mouth quickly, chewing it gently, with an intoxicated expression on his face. In the huge room, everyone looked at Saxton blankly. The moment he swallowed, everyone present subconsciously swallowed. Oh. Bang. Suddenly, a strange sound accompanied by the sound of clothes exploding came from Saxton. Listening to this weird sound, the originally silent voice became even more silent. At this moment, under the shocked gazes of everyone, Saxton was twisting his body continuously while making unexplained moans from his mouth. No wonder he is the head chef. The chef who just urged Saxton glanced at Karen and Jun, who were thinking deeply, and sighed in his heart. With this move, who can say that the food is not delicious? I still have to practice. I just don't know when Saxton learned to burst his clothes. He is so professional. Jessie looked at this scene dumbfounded and couldn't help but asked. Is it really so delicious? Saxton seemed to hear this question. He gradually closed his eyes and seemed to savor it carefully. This is the first time I've tasted this kind of taste. This dish has unprecedented umami and warm sweetness, which makes the whole dish even more mysterious. The biggest feeling I have about this dish is that the fresh and fragrant sea salt combined with the soft snake meat is like a dancing elf dancing on the tip of my tongue. Ah, this taste is like countless small seafood swimming freely in the deep sea. Swim. As he spoke, he actually opened his arms and paddled them randomly, making it look like he was swimming in the sea. Seeing his exaggerated movements, everyone secretly complained in their hearts. Let me go, do you want to be so exaggerated? Even if Colonel Cullen did it himself, there is no need to be like this. I usually see you with thick eyebrows and big eyes, but I didn't expect you to have such a side. Ugh, it's so disgusting. But is it really that delicious? This is the doubt of almost everyone present, that is, whether this meal is really as delicious as Saxton described. Seeing Saxton putting another fork in his mouth, screaming while eating, the chef just now couldn't help it anymore. Colonel, can you let me taste it too? His tone was pious and pleading. Karen glanced at him in surprise, then pointed at Saxton and said slowly. Look, I told you that there will be side effects after eating this meal, so you still want to take it. Want to eat? This chef has mastered the art of cooking. With such delicious food in front of you, there is no reason not to taste it. All right. Karen looked around and saw everyone looking at Saxton expectantly or strangely, and said. What about you? We want to eat too. Everyone shouted in unison, like hungry wolves who had been hungry for several days, staring at the fat meat in front of them. At this point, if they are not allowed to taste it, it will probably be difficult to end it. A person eats, and a group of people eats, so Karen took out several knives and forks from the kitchen, and in the expectant eyes of everyone, he handed the knives and forks to everyone. In that case, you all should try it. Because he is relatively good at eating, he cooks a lot of food and serves the food on a large plate, so he is not very worried about not having enough food. The hungry wolves, as soon as they took the knives and forks, quickly walked towards the food, completely ignoring dining etiquette, and began to taste it crazily. As a result, the room that was quiet just now began to roar with waves. Oh, ah! It's so delicious, so fresh, so sweet. The freshness and sweetness are constantly intertwined, like a symphony in the sea. It's intoxicating. Why is this meat so chewy? Such good elasticity cannot be the elasticity of meat. It is obviously greasy fat, but it does not feel greasy at all. It is really surprising that there is such perfect fat. Incredible. It's so delicious, as if there are countless particles jumping alive in the mouth. It's so delicious. When the snake meat and seaweed are blended together, there seems to be a harmonious power in the sea in the mouth. It inspired new life and showed a unique new atmosphere, which is great. Jun and Karen, look at me and I look at you, their eyes filled with disbelief. At this moment, Jun was sure that Karen had not drugged him, because no medicine had such a strange effect. Is it really the charm of the food itself? Jun recalled the delicious food he tasted just now. It was undeniable that it was the most delicious food he had ever eaten in his life. Looking at the ridiculous scene in front of him, Jun's face became very ugly. The whole place has gone crazy, with all kinds of blushing screams and unbearable moans coming and going. What is even more unacceptable to Jun is that their clothes burst out, all of them exposed their breasts, and their bodies continued to twist. If it weren't for the fact that all the soldiers present were men, she would have really thought she was at a silver party. Could it be that you were like this just now? She shook her head. Although she also made various unexplained sounds, her clothes did not burst. Recalling the memory just now, she gave Karen a hard look, and then tightened her upper clothes. Although Karen prepared a lot of food, she couldn't bear them eating like this. Soon, the food was eaten away. Looking at the satisfied faces of everyone, Jun swallowed. No, what are you thinking about? Although Karen's food is delicious, the side effects are too great. Shaking his head, even if I starve to death in Jun and eat unpalatable food, I will not eat a bowl of rice from Karen. Recalling the smell of rice just now, Jun hesitated. Maybe? It doesn't matter if you eat it again. Chapter 50. I added. The first person to wake up was Saxton, who was tasting the food at the beginning. When he saw the colleagues shouting around him, he felt like he was struck by lightning. What's going on? Where are my clothes? Then he took off his chef hat and put it on his chest. I told you, this food is a little weird, as you can see, that's it. Karen looked at Saxton speechlessly. He's not a buddy, he's a man, who's looking at you. So I just... Saxton pointed to the chef next to him who kept yelling. He felt like he was stuck in his throat and could not speak. Karen nodded in affirmation. This is what you want to eat. I stopped you, but I didn't. Yes, everything has nothing to do with Sir. Saxton remembered that he really insisted on eating at that time. Looking at the people making fun of him, he was very happy at this moment. Fortunately, I'm not the only one eating it. There are so many comrades accompanying me. Otherwise... Saxton trembled, stood up, and admired the scene in front of him with great interest. As Saxton woke up, more and more people began to regain consciousness. Looking at the people who were constantly swinging, they all understood what just happened without Karen's explanation. They all imitated Saxton and covered their hats in front of their bodies. Like Saxton, they quickly adjusted their mentality. Firstly, they really wanted to eat, and secondly, everyone present ate, so they didn't feel too embarrassed. As the last person woke up, they looked at each other, not knowing what to say. Did the colonel cook this meal himself? Saxton knew that Karen had asked him to prepare a lot of utensils and condiments in the morning. Yes. Karen nodded awkwardly. The colonel is truly a master of cooking. I have never eaten such delicious food, although there are some side effects. Saxton gave a thumbs up and praised. Karen touched her nose and said with a smile, although the food is delicious, it is not suitable for eating. What did the colonel say? Since the food is delicious, it must be suitable for eating. The worst is that one person can eat it secretly. Saxton retorted, giving Karen an idea. Stealing food? So exciting. Karen didn't know what she was thinking of, her eyes wandered over Jun for a moment. Jun glared at Karen fiercely, and then said. Okay, now that you've finished tasting, you all can go back. Saxton did not move, but looked at Karen with a troubled expression, and said with some embarrassment. Colonel, I wonder if I would be lucky enough to be your disciple and learn your cooking skills. As if he felt that his request was too abrupt, he added. As long as you let me study with you, I am willing to serve you for the rest of my life. Karen shuddered when he heard this and looked at Saxton, who had a wrinkled face. He prevaricated. I don't know how to teach this. It doesn't matter, as long as you let me watch while you cook. Saxton said with excitement on his face, and the chefs who were about to leave all stopped and stared at the two of them with burning eyes. Karen touched her nose and suddenly had an idea. She looked confused. Actually, I don't know how to cook at all. It's true, if he didn't have the skill of being a gourmet, he wouldn't even try it. But you just... Saxton pointed to the licked clean plate and asked, the food just now was obviously delicious. Karen's face straightened up and she asked in a deep voice, how many years have you been cooking? More than 20 years ago. Since you have been cooking for more than 20 years, have you ever heard of any rice that has this effect? Saxton was silent for a moment, recalling it carefully in his mind. He had never heard of such a strange thing, let alone seeing it. So, he shook his head, I've never seen it before. Isn't this a new cuisine invented by the Colonel? New cuisine? Do you believe this? How old am I? Even if I were a genius, I wouldn't be able to cook such a meal. After speaking, without waiting for Saxton to retort, Karen continued. Actually, the reason why this happens is because I added. It's because I added the ability of the devil fruit. Devil fruit? Saxton was stunned, and instantly understood why he acted so strangely after eating. Is this so? Of course, otherwise how can I explain why you behaved so strangely after eating? Karen remained calm. At this moment, he was very glad that he had made up the yin fruit. Actually, I am a user with the power of the word fruit. Everyone in the Marine headquarters knows that I just used the devil fruit, which is why you are like this. Really? Saxton looked at Karen suspiciously, feeling that something was wrong. Yes, Karen is indeed a person with the ability to speak fruit. Jun said suddenly from the side. Is that so? Saxton looked disappointed, then lowered his head and slowly left Karen's room. Wait, Karen suddenly said, pointing to the rags of clothes on the floor, take your clothes away. So, everyone turned around and cleaned Karen's room, even washing the empty dishes. After packing everything, they left Karen's room one by one, shirtless, and tiptoed to go to the military supply office and get some clothes. Under the blue sky and white clouds, a seagull sometimes appears on the bow of the boat, sometimes swooping down to catch fish. At this time, the sea was calm and the sunlight was shining on the sea. The waves were sparkling, shining with golden light, like a dream, and it was really beautiful. At this moment, a voice called out to everyone who was walking cautiously. Hey! What's going on? Where are your clothes? A soldier patrolling the deck blocked everyone, looked at the people with different expressions, and asked. We. Everyone looked at me, but no one spoke. They really don't know what to say. They can't say that clothes are just for food. Thinking of the scene that just happened, he could only feel lucky. Fortunately, everyone present ate it. Otherwise. Ahem, we were training just now, and all our clothes were blown away by the sea breeze. Jesse randomly made an excuse to send the soldiers in front of him away. Really? What a coincidence. Not a single thing was left. The patrolling soldiers looked at everyone suspiciously. Saxton suddenly raised his head and looked at the soldier in front of him. What's wrong with you? Don't you recognize me? Chef Saxton. Everyone who ate on this warship knew Saxton, and the patrol soldiers naturally knew him too. He looked carefully and found that more than half of the 10 or so people were chefs. Therefore, this made his doubts even greater. Chef training? Do you think I believe it or not? I remember that there was only one room for Colonel Cullen in that place, right? He looked at the location where the visitor came out and the twitchy expressions of everyone, and made a bold guess in his mind. I didn't expect Colonel Cullen to have such a hobby,